Hi guys. Tonight we begin with you stepping into a world colder than anything your modern thermostat can imagine. You breathe in, and the air hits your lungs like a sharp reminder that you are thousands of years away from insulation foam, central heating, or even that embarrassing old space heater you hide under your desk. Here, the wind is not just wind. It is a living force that claws at your skin and whispers things like, "You probably will not survive this. At least not without learning fast." The sky glows with a fading winter sun, and the ground crunches beneath your feet as if the entire earth has frozen in mid-sigh. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you are settling in, tell me your location and what time it is for you right now. I love seeing how far this sleepy little campfire reaches. Now, dim the lights, and let the cold world settle around you as the story begins to warm your imagination. You trudge forward across a barren plain that stretches until the horizon blurs into soft grey. The bitter gust swirls tiny ice crystals against your cheeks. They sting, and you cup your hands over your mouth, blowing into them for even the slightest hint of heat. Your fur boots crunch heavily, already damp at the edges from trudging across frostbitten grass. Your breath leaves your mouth in slow ribbons, drifting upward like tiny ghosts that fade before they reach the sky. Around you is nothing that looks like home. No roof, no walls, only a wide open, merciless winter landscape dotted with lonely boulders and tufts of brittle shrubs. Yet as you keep going, you begin to imagine something that warms you from the inside. You picture the earliest humans walking this same path. They had no modern tools, no survival guides, no camping stores, no thermal socks that promise miracles. Still, they endured. And not only endured, they managed to build places where you could sleep without the cold biting your bones. That simple fact, that mainstream piece of knowledge we usually brush past in textbooks, feels astonishing when you stand here in the wind. Early humans were not just wandering through the ice age like distracted tourists. They were engineers shaped by necessity. A few steps later, the wind shifts again, nudging at your side with a cold pressure like an irritated neighbor telling you to move along. You tilt your head as you sense something else out here. A faint smell of old smoke. Not fresh, but lingering. Like someone once camped here long ago, and the earth still remembers it. Maybe it is just your imagination playing tricks on you, but it makes you look for signs of shelter. You scan the horizon and wonder, how did the earliest humans start? What was the very first moment when one of them, someone very much like you, realized that this freezing environment could be shaped, pushed, and tamed? Historians still argue whether the earliest shelters were primarily instinctive behavior or a slow accumulation of learned strategies passed down generation by generation. Some think humans observed how animals survived the cold. Others suspect an almost artistic spark in our ancestors, a moment when survival and creativity blended. The debate floats around your thoughts like the frosty air that curls around your ears. As you keep walking, you picture a small band of hunter-gatherers making their way across this same plain. A few adults in front, checking the wind direction, scanning for predators. Others at the back, protecting children from the cold. One quirky tidbit you may not know is that in some Ice Age regions, humans would smear a mixture of clay and crushed plant fibers on their exposed skin to reduce heat loss. Not exactly trendy, but surprisingly effective. You imagine the strange texture of it drying on your cheeks as you walk. Your steps soften as you crest a small rise. Below you, the terrain begins to dip into a shallow valley. The wind dims slightly. Not much, but enough to make your shoulders relax by a fraction. You pause, letting the faint shelter of the slope wash over you. This is your first lesson in primitive survival. Even the smallest change in the landscape can help you stay warm. A simple dip in the ground can cut the wind enough to give your fire a chance. Early humans learned this in moments of desperation, feet numb, children crying, ice forming on eyelashes. But they learned fast because the cold is not patient with slow learners. The plain behind you feels endless, but down here, you sense possibility. If you were one of those early humans, you would have looked around just like this. Eyes searching, hands feeling the soil, listening for signs of running water or the rustle of game. But more than anything, you would be scanning for something that could protect you from the cold. Maybe a cluster of rocks, a fallen tree, or an overhanging cliff. Even a place where the wind funnels differently could mean the difference between life and death. You crouch and touch the ground. It feels hard, solid, and uninviting, yet something about it also feels familiar. Humans have always knelt like this, checking earth, tasting air, weighing risks. Survival is not a modern invention. It is our oldest tradition. Your mind shifts again, drifting into the deeper past. You imagine how far humans traveled during the Ice Age. Entire continents lay open, sprawling with dangerous beauty. Herds of mammoth roamed the land. Saber-toothed cats left prints in the snow. And every group of humans had to understand how to stay warm long enough to hunt, eat, sleep, and move again the next morning. Cold was not a single threat. It was constant. You straighten up and feel the wind tug at your hood again. It steals whatever warmth your imagination briefly gave you, but that is fine. It brings you back into the moment, because you are here to learn how to survive as they did. You imagine gripping a rough wooden spear in one hand, fur wrapped across your shoulders, and the soft crunch of snow giving way as you move. You still have no shelter yet, not even the faintest hint of a roof, but you start to sense how a home begins. It begins with attention. It begins with noticing. Something rustles behind a cluster of wind-bent shrubs, maybe a fox, maybe just the brush settling under the frost. But you turn your head slowly, realizing that every movement out here matters. You picture a hunting party exploring this same spot, stamping down snow, leaving tracks that twist across the valley like scribbles. They could have paused right where you stand, debating whether this place could hold warmth. Your eyes drift toward a cluster of rocks near the bottom of the valley. The stones are irregular, leaning on each other at strange angles, casting uneven shadows. You walk toward them, cautious but curious. Each step takes you deeper into the valley, and the wind seems to sigh above your head instead of slashing directly at your skin. When you reach the stones, you rest your hand on the cold surface. The rock feels ancient, steady, as if it has watched countless winters come and go. Maybe early humans leaned against these very stones. Maybe they felt the same small relief you feel now. You breathe slowly and imagine how these stones could be the beginning of something warm. Not much, not enough to sleep in yet, but a seed of an idea, a protected pocket of land, a place to start. And as you stand there, with frost clinging to your clothing and your breath drifting upward in silver curls, you feel yourself easing into the long story ahead, the story of turning a cold world into a home, one small choice at a time, one stone, one spark, one lesson. The wind softens just slightly, as if the land itself is ready to let you learn. You leave the cluster of stones behind and walk farther into the quiet valley, letting the wind thin out until it becomes more of a distant murmur than a constant attack. The cold still presses at your skin, but the intensity has shifted. Here the land feels a little more forgiving, a little less determined to chase you out. You move slowly, taking in the contours of the earth, and your eyes drift toward the darker patches beneath distant ridges. Those shadowy pockets hint at something important, not man-made, not crafted by clever hands, but still useful. Natural shelters, the kind of places the earliest humans learned to treasure. As you approach the slope, you begin to notice how the land folds itself in subtle ways. There is a steep outcrop that juts out from the hillside, forming a narrow mouth beneath it. Not deep enough to call a cave, but deep enough to shield you from the gusts. You step closer, feeling a sense of recognition. Humans have always been drawn to these hidden places. You crouch under the rocky overhang, and suddenly the noise of the wind fades into a low hum. The chill still lingers, but at least it stops scraping your skin. It feels like the world has pulled a heavy blanket above your head. You sit back and imagine being a hunter-gatherer stepping into this same hollow thousands of years ago. Your breath joins theirs in the cold air. Maybe they carried meat from a successful hunt. Maybe they were soaking wet from crossing a river. One mainstream historical fact is that many early human groups, especially during colder climatic phases, made temporary homes in natural shelters like this. Not because they lacked imagination for building, but because they understood the value of time. When the cold turns brutal and the daylight is short, you cannot always waste hours gathering materials. Sometimes the smartest shelter is the one the earth already prepared for you. You let your fingers brush over the rock wall. It feels rough, with tiny ridges that catch at your skin. The stone smells faintly damp, rich with the scent of minerals. You close your eyes and listen. A soft drip travels somewhere deeper in the rock, water shifting through cracks. The air inside is cooler but still calmer than outside. You picture a small fire set right at the entrance, its glow reflecting off the uneven surface, warming the stone so it radiates heat slowly back into the space. People huddling close, their backs pressed against the walls, grateful for even this small comfort. You shift your weight and peer deeper into the overhang. It is not dark enough to hide anything dangerous, but not bright either. The kind of halfway darkness that makes your imagination flicker. You imagine ancient hands feeling along the stone for cracks where warm air might escape. You imagine someone tapping the ground with a stick to test if the floor was stable enough to sleep on. One quirky tidbit archaeologists discovered in some ancient shelters is that people would sometimes line the ground with layers of crushed reeds mixed with ash, both to soften their bedding and to deter insects. You imagine the faint rustle of those dry plant fibers beneath your body as you settle in for the night. You stand again and look outward from the shelter. The valley stretches in front of you like a long, shallow bowl filled with frost. You think about how early humans must have chosen their shelters with care. It was not enough to find a cave. It had to be positioned near water, near animals, and near resources like flint. It also had to face the right direction. A south-facing overhang often captured more precious winter sunlight. But historians still argue whether orientation was a deliberate strategy from the beginning or a later cultural refinement that emerged once people gained more experience with harsh climates. The truth is lost somewhere between instinct and ingenuity. You take a few steps back out into the open air. The wind returns, brushing at your face with icy fingers. You squint toward another rocky formation farther along the slope. That one looks more promising. Taller, darker, maybe even an actual cave, something deep enough to hold warmth once a fire is lit inside. You walk toward it, your boots crunching rhythmically on frost-hardened soil. Each step carries you closer to understanding how much difference a simple indentation in the landscape could make. When you reach the entrance, you feel the atmosphere shift again. The cave mouth yawns before you, not intimidating but inviting in a quiet, practical way. You step inside and exhale. The sound echoes faintly, not sharply, but with a soft rebound that tells you the space is not too wide. The walls narrow the farther you go. This is the kind of place early humans might have favored, especially during storms. Large enough for a family group, small enough to trap heat. You kneel and run your hand across the cold floor. Stone, smoothed by centuries of dripping water. You inhale deeply. The air smells slightly metallic, but also earthy, like old dust and hidden pockets of moisture. You imagine placing a fire right at the entrance so smoke can escape without choking you. You imagine the flickering orange light reaching along the walls, making shadows dance in hypnotic patterns. Your footsteps echo softly as you look around. You can almost see them here. A man repairing a spearhead, a woman scraping a hide with a stone tool, children curled under fur blankets near the fire, giggling or whispering secrets. Maybe one of them is staring at the shadows on the walls, pretending the shapes are mammoths or giant birds. In a place like this, imagination becomes a natural part of survival. You turn to face the outside world again, and sunlight frames the cave opening. You picture a hunter stepping through that doorway carrying fresh meat. He shakes snow off his shoulders and sighs in relief as he enters warmth. The tribe greets him quietly, their voices soft in the enclosed space. There is a comfort in knowing that rock surrounds you, rock that cannot be blown away, rock that will not roll over in the night. You feel that comfort too as you lean against the cave wall. The cold outside is still real, still harsh, but inside, there is a hint of belonging. You wander around the cave, imagining small adaptations your ancestors would have made, storing firewood in dry corners, placing stones strategically to reflect heat, hanging strips of meat near the ceiling where smoke could help preserve it. Early humans treated natural shelters as both a home and a workshop, a place to rest and a place to prepare for the next day. After a few more breaths, you step back into the open, giving the cave one last look. You realize how valuable these natural shelters must have been. A ready-made refuge that saved time, energy, and even lives. They offered more than shade or protection from predators. They offered the possibility of surviving the night. You take a slow step forward, ready to follow the trail of early shelter building into new forms. The valley stretches onward, waiting. You walk away from the cool breath of the cave and step back into the open valley, feeling the cold gather around you once more. This time, though, you carry something new in your mind. You understand a little better how early humans leaned on the land itself when they had nothing else. But now you begin to sense another step forward in their long struggle against the cold. You lift your hands toward your mouth and breathe into them, watching the thin fog form and fade. Fire. It is such a simple idea from a modern perspective, yet here, surrounded by ice-crusted grass and a sky that feels too pale to hold warmth, the idea becomes almost sacred. You take a few slow steps, letting the crunch of frost beneath your feet fall into a gentle rhythm. As you walk, you picture the earliest moments when humans first tamed fire, not just as a spark that scorched a bit of grass, but as a companion they carried from one place to the next. While exact details are buried under tens of thousands of years of mystery, one widely accepted piece of historical knowledge is that early humans learned to conserve embers by wrapping them in plant fibers or nesting them in soft ash to keep them alive during travel. You imagine holding one of those ember bundles in your hand, warm, fragile, a tiny heart beating against the cold. The valley stretches wider as the terrain opens up again. Far ahead, you spot a cluster of fallen branches scattered across the snow. You move toward them, sensing their importance. As you kneel and touch the bark, your fingers brush over a frozen surface that crackles slightly beneath your pressure. It is not perfect firewood, but you can still imagine ancient hands eagerly gathering pieces just like this. In a world with no lighters, no matchbooks, no metal spark rods, collecting wood was not just a task, it was survival itself. You gather a few imaginary branches into your arms, feeling their uneven weight, and picture how early bands of humans must have done the same. They would have carried dry twigs tucked under clothing or tied in bundles against their backs, walking for long hours in search of a better place to build warmth. Sometimes, if the weather was too wet or snow hid the forest floor, they would follow animal trails, because animals instinctively knew where natural windbreaks formed. You let the image settle softly in your mind. As you hold the branches, another memory of the land seems to rise from the air, a faint shift of wind, carrying the imagined scent of ancient smoke. You close your eyes and picture the glow of a fire crackling in a cold night, sparks jumping upward, tiny brief stars disappearing into darkness. Even now, the idea warms you from inside. You set the branches down and crouch beside them. You imagine placing dried grass in a small nest shape and striking flint against a rough stone. The sound echoes in your mind, sharp, metallic, the shower of tiny sparks falling into the nest. You lean close, blowing gently. You can almost hear the faint pop as the first ember catches. You can feel the flutter of excitement that ancient people must have felt when that fragile glow appeared. A detail that sometimes surprises people who study early survival practices is that some prehistoric groups used glowing chunks of fungus as portable fire sources. This odd but real trick involved selecting specific tree fungi that smoldered slowly without bursting into open flame. You picture yourself holding such a smoldering piece, its warmth traveling into your palm, the smell earthy and slightly sweet. It is strange, unexpected, and strangely comforting. You gather the branches around your small imaginary fire, arranging them with care. You picture how early humans observed wind direction, learned which woods burned longest, and discovered that some dry grasses exploded into flame with a soft whoosh. You lay your hands near the imaginary heat, letting it warm your skin. You rise and look around the valley again. Fire was not just a heat source. It was a tool that shaped everything. It provided light when predators prowled the darkness. It hardened wooden spear tips. It dried soaked clothing. It cooked meat so it stored longer and provided more energy. The glow of fire became a center for stories, songs, and whispered plans. As you walk forward, you imagine following a small band that carries their fire from camp to camp. They kneel near rivers, scoop water into hide bags, and use hot stones to warm it. They place branches in carefully arranged circles to protect the flames from wind. You picture the glow lighting their faces while snow falls silently around them. You can almost feel how the heat sharpens their hope, giving them strength to move on. You keep moving across the landscape, feeling the wind tug your hair back. Ahead, you notice a patch of darker ground beneath a cliff. You walk to it and kneel down. The soil here is blackened with an ancient memory. Charcoal, burnt earth. Maybe lightning created a wildfire here long ago. Or maybe a group of early humans gathered in this exact spot, warming themselves, laughing softly, sharpening tools. You run your fingers across the dark soil and think of all the fires that once flickered where you kneel. A question settles in your thoughts. When did fire become more than an accident? More than a gift stolen from a tree struck by lightning? Some researchers continue to debate whether the mastery of fire happened quickly or gradually. There are theories that humans might have carried fire long before they fully understood how to create it on their own. The concept drifts around your mind like smoke, swirling without settling. You straighten up and take a step back. The blackened earth glimmers faintly under the pale sunlight, as if holding the memory of warmth. You picture someone sitting right there, thousands of years ago, feeding tiny twigs into a flame while snow fell outside the shelter of a rocky ledge, firelight dancing in eyes that looked very much like your own. You stand silently, letting the imagined warmth soak into your thoughts. If you close your eyes, you can almost feel the heat radiating across your skin. You can almost smell the mixture of wood resin, animal fat, and crisp air blending into one unique scent that only a prehistoric fire could have. You continue walking uphill, knowing that fire was the turning point. Without it, no shelter would have been warm enough, no night long enough to survive. The cold could swallow bodies, freeze fingers, and silence breath, but fire fought back with a stubborn glow. And because early humans protected it so fiercely, you are able to walk here now, imagining their journey. You step onto a slightly higher ridge. The sky above you shifts to a deeper grey, clouds thickening as if preparing another snowfall. You brace yourself against the breeze, and your thoughts drift toward where this story goes next. If fire was the heart of early survival, then the shelters humans built would be the bones surrounding that heart. But those will come in time. For now, you take one last breath of the cold air, feeling your lungs expand with the same determination that once kept your ancient ancestors alive. Your next steps carry the faint warmth of the fire you imagined. That warmth moves with you, small but steady, just like the ember bundles our earliest families carried from place to place. A quiet promise that the cold will not win easily. You leave the ridge behind, letting the cold press against you again as you continue across the valley. The wind nips lightly at your neck, nothing ferocious, just a persistent reminder that you are far from warmth. You walk slowly, adjusting the fur collar around your shoulders, and your imagination shifts toward a new truth of early survival. If fire was the beating heart of warmth, then animal skins became the walls that protected that heart. You picture a bundle of hides tucked under someone's arm long ago, stiff with frost, heavy with the smell of a recent hunt. They were not elegant or pretty, but they were life-saving. As you move, you notice a pair of large rocks leaning toward each other at a narrow angle. Between them is a shallow pocket of earth that seems sheltered from the wind. You crouch there, letting the semi-enclosed space wrap around you. You imagine spreading a thick hide across the opening, letting it hang like a curtain that flutters gently in the breeze. The moment you imagine it, you feel the illusion of warmth. Just a trace. Just enough to make you understand why early humans relied so heavily on skins. You place your hand on the ground and picture a small group of hunters returning from a long chase. They carry the fresh hide of a deer or wild horse across their shoulders. One detail that appears often in archaeological studies is that early humans processed hides using sharp flakes of flint, scraping away every trace of fat or tissue until the surface softened. The process created a steady rhythm of scraping sounds that filled the air of many ancient shelters. You imagine that soft rasping as you kneel here. You stand again and lift your head toward the sky. Pale, washed-out light filters through thin clouds. You remember the feel of that imagined hide curtain swaying beside you. Early humans did more than just wear skins. They used them to build, to insulate, to block wind, and to create private spaces inside caves and temporary camps. The hides could be stretched over wooden frames, tied with sinew, or weighed down by stones to form low tents. You begin to picture one now. You walk along the stones and imagine yourself selecting sturdy branches. You bend them slightly, testing their flexibility. You drive the ends into the ground, forming the skeleton of a shelter. Then you picture laying a large hide over it, the fur side facing inward to trap heat, the smooth side outward to resist snow. You tug the imaginary hide tight, and your mind fills with the scent of tanned leather, smoky and earthy. Your hands lower as you pause to think. You recall that ancient communities often preserved hides by treating them with animal brains or natural oils. A curious detail some researchers mention is that one brain could usually tan one hide, a strange coincidence that early humans likely discovered through careful observation. You imagine stirring a mixture like that in a wooden bowl, while cold winds roll across the land. You step around your imaginary shelter, walking slowly, feeling how the space forms a fragile yet functional home. The entrance is low, forcing you to crouch as you step inside. The moment your head dips under the hide flap, the world becomes softer. The wind fades. The air grows still. You imagine the warmth rising from a small fire near the center, the smoke drifting upward through a tiny gap carefully cut into the roof. You settle cross-legged on the ground, letting your thoughts explore the structure. Hides were not merely tools for warmth. They were symbols of effort, cooperation, and survival. Several historical interpretations describe scenes in which the entire group helped prepare a hide, from scraping to drying to stitching. Children carried small pieces. Adults stretched the larger ones across frames. Elders checked the work and suggested improvements. You picture these scenes unfolding around you. You run your fingers along the imaginary wall of hide. It feels thick, slightly rough, yet undeniably protective. You imagine how it rustles gently when the wind pushes against it. You imagine shadows cast from the fire, moving softly across its surface. Inside this space, warmth feels achievable. You breathe slowly and picture yourself tightening a strip of sinew around the bottom edge of the hide to keep the wind from sneaking in. The knots pull firmly, steadying the structure. You think about what it must have been like to sleep under such a roof. The sounds from outside muffled, the smells of smoke, cooked meat, and warm fur surrounding you. A quiet hum of voices sharing stories. You shift slightly, moving deeper into your imagination. You picture other shelters nearby, some larger, some smaller, some shaped like small domes, others stretched between large branches. The variety reminds you that early humans were not bound to a single design. They adapted quickly, using the materials available around them. One idea that researchers still discuss is whether certain regions developed unique hide shelter styles based on climate conditions or the types of animals hunted there. It is possible that different groups had their own building traditions, their own preferred stitching patterns, their own ways of decorating the edges with small beads or carved bone. You step out of the shelter and stand tall again. The wind greets you immediately, cold and persistent. You brace against it and imagine carrying a heavy hide on your back. The fur would brush your ears as you walk. Its weight would shift with each step. The smell would cling to your clothing. But it would also offer a sense of security, a portable wall against the cold. You walk a little farther along the valley floor, imagining how early humans transformed hides into more complex structures as time passed. Some groups built shelters with multiple layers of skins, each layer trapping heat more efficiently, similar to how modern winter jackets use insulation. Others created framed doorways reinforced with bone or wood, giving the entrance stability. You picture tying two hides together seam to seam, pulling the edges tight, smoothing out wrinkles with your palm. You kneel again near a cluster of rocks and imagine draping smaller hides across them to form pockets of warmth. Maybe the hides were used to line sleeping areas. Maybe they were shaped into padded cushions. You picture a child lying on a soft hide bed, drifting into sleep while a fire crackles nearby. You lift your head, and your breath floats upward in slow curls. Your thoughts drift to the complexity of how people used skins. They were more than clothing. They were parts of roofs, parts of walls, parts of bedding, parts of bags. In many camps, hides defined the interior layout. They separated spaces for sleeping from spaces for food storage. They blocked drafts from entering doorways. They even muffled sounds when storms raged outside. Your fingers brush the cold surface of a stone. You picture a hide stretched across it to form a windbreak. You imagine the soft tapping sound as the hide hits the stone in a light breeze. You can almost feel the contrast between the warm air inside and the sharp cold outside. You stand again and take one slow breath. Through your imagination, you have built a small but sturdy shelter. It is simple, raw, imperfect, but undeniably warm. With hides and fire, early humans turned empty valleys into homes. Ahead of you, the land begins to slope downward again. You sense that your journey is leading towards something deeper, something built not only above the earth but within it. But that is for the next part of your story. For now, you carry with you the soft strength of animal skins, memories of scraping tools, and the quiet warmth of a hide shelter glowing in the night. You move down the gentle slope, leaving behind the imagined hide shelter that still clings to your senses with its smoky warmth. The air grows colder again as the valley opens wider, and for a moment you feel as if the land is reminding you that comfort here is always temporary. The wind glides along the surface of the ground, brushing your ankles, whispering that you must keep learning how your ancestors endured nights that stretched endlessly through winter. You take another slow step, and your boots sink a little into softer earth. That softness sparks a new idea in your mind. If the surface could not offer enough warmth, early humans learned to look beneath it. You walk toward a shallow depression in the landscape, almost a bowl carved naturally by slow-moving water long ago. The wind blows right over it instead of into it, and you feel the difference immediately. Less sting, less push against your chest. You crouch and place your hand on the edge of the dip. The soil feels cool but strangely steady, and as you trace the shape of the depression, you begin to imagine how people once shaped hollows like this into life-saving pit homes. You slide down into the depression, your boots skidding slightly on the loose dirt. At the bottom, you kneel and rest your palm against the earth. You close your eyes for a moment. You picture digging, not with metal shovels but with sharp stones, sturdy sticks, and bare hands. You imagine scraping through layers of frozen topsoil, breaking small roots, lifting clumps of dirt onto your shoulder, all while the cold air lays heavily on your neck. One widely accepted detail in prehistoric archaeology is that early humans used simple excavation methods to create semi-underground shelters that held heat far better than exposed huts. The earth itself became insulation, embracing the inhabitants on all sides. You stand and look around, imagining the size of a shelter that would fit an entire family. You begin to trace a rough circle with your foot, turning slowly, letting your imagination shape the boundary of the home. A ring of deeper soil, a round trench carved over several days of hard work. You picture a group of people working together, their breaths visible in the frosty air, their motions synchronized in steady rhythm. Some dig, some carry dirt away, others prepare poles to frame the roof. You crouch again and brush the dirt with your fingertips. A faint thought surfaces, something unusual but plausible from ancient ingenuity. Some groups in cold climates reportedly strengthened the walls of their pit homes with woven branches coated in mud, creating a layered surface that hardened when dried. The mixture helped block drafts and added stability. You imagine smoothing wet mud against a framework, your hands sticky, the scent of damp earth filling your nose. A strange method, maybe, but effective. You shift slightly and think of the floor. Earth alone could be cold, even inside a pit, so you picture lining the bottom with dried grasses or reeds. Maybe even layering leaves beneath the grasses to create a cushion that also held pockets of warm air. You watch in your imagination as someone carefully arranges the bedding, patting it flat, smoothing wrinkles. A simple gesture, yet vital for surviving the night. As you rise, you picture the next step, a roof. One idea suggested by researchers is that early builders placed long branches across the top of the pit, creating a gentle dome that could support hides, reeds, or packed earth. You imagine collecting thick branches from a nearby grove, dragging them through the snow, and climbing onto the rim of your pit to lay them across the opening. Each branch bends slightly under its own weight, but together they form a strong lattice. You exhale slowly, your breath drifting upward like pale smoke. The wind has trouble reaching you down here, and you feel how the pit protects you. Then your thoughts drift toward a question that experts continue to puzzle over. Did early humans make deliberate choices about how deep to dig, or was depth determined only by available time and energy? Some anthropologists suggest that groups experimented with different depths based on local temperatures. Others think convenience mattered more than precision. The uncertainty hovers faintly in your mind, like a quiet breeze moving through tall grass. You lift your gaze to the imaginary roof. You picture laying hides across the branches, weighing the edges down with stones to seal the structure. Maybe you add a second layer of reeds for extra insulation. Maybe you pack loose snow on top, knowing snow can trap heat if handled carefully. You imagine crawling inside the finished shelter. The entrance would be narrow, barely big enough for a person, but that narrowness would keep heat from escaping. You duck your head and step into the space in your mind. It feels quiet inside. The world outside fades. Only the muffled hush of wind passing above remains. You picture a small fire in a pit near the center, its smoke escaping through a narrow opening in the roof. The warmth gathers around you, rising gently, touching your face and hands. You kneel inside the imagined home and feel its shape. Rounded, close, comforting. You imagine a family sitting around the fire, someone roasting roots or drying strips of meat, a child wrapped in a fur blanket, curled against a parent, a sleeping mat pressed close to the wall. The earth around you radiates a faint warmth, holding heat far longer than open air. You lean back, letting the space settle around you. You think of how pit homes existed in many forms across the ancient world. Some were shallow basins with simple coverings. Others were deeper, large enough to stand inside. Some had side niches carved for storage. Some even had raised platforms made from branches or stones so people could sleep off the cold ground. You climb out of the mental shelter and stand at the rim of your imagined pit. The wind brushes your shoulders again. You look down at the hollow you have created and feel a quiet admiration for the ingenuity of early humans. The earth is cold, yes, But the earth also protects. It shields. It hides. It holds heat long after sunset. You take a step back and imagine the whole community using this technique. A cluster of pits across the valley floor, some newly dug, some old and collapsing, some with smoke rising from their roofs. The soft glow of firelight within, a gentle murmur of voices drifting up into the cold night. You walk away slowly, your steps crunching on frost. You can still feel the warmth of the pit shelter lingering in your thoughts. Early humans learned to reach down into the ground when the surface world became too harsh. They found warmth in the earth itself, trusting soil, stone, and clever hands to carry them through winter. Ahead of you, the valley opens into wide plains once again. The cold sweeps across it, but now you walk with a little more understanding. The next lesson awaits just beyond the horizon. You walk out of the pit-shaped hollow and make your way across a stretch of land that feels emptier than before. The wind curls low along the ground, gathering thin veils of snow and sweeping them in slow arcs around your ankles. You pull your fur collar closer, imagining how your ancestors must have braced themselves in similar moments. Each step reminds you that the cold was not a visitor in their world. It was the permanent host, and everything they built had to negotiate with it. As you travel farther, the landscape begins to shift. The valley narrows into a corridor of pale grasses and scattered stones, and beyond it you see a gleam of white. Not snow, not ice, something larger. Something with curves and angles that no natural hill could create. You pause, narrowing your eyes, and take a few careful steps toward it. Then you see it clearly. A massive ribcage rising from the earth, half buried in frost. Bones. Immense, ancient bones. You draw closer, feeling the scale of them press against your imagination. Each rib towers above your head, thick as a tree trunk, bleached by sun and wind. For a moment, you stand still, sensing the ghost of a creature that could have once shaken the ground with its weight. A mammoth. You run your hand along one of the ribs, feeling shallow grooves where wind has eaten at the surface. The bone is cold, solid, and surprisingly smooth. It is here, in front of this enormous skeleton, that you begin to understand another ingenious step in the story of staying warm. Long ago, humans did not simply hunt mammoths for meat and hides. They also used their bones as building materials. Many archaeological discoveries reveal that these colossal structures became frames for winter shelters. Mammoth bones were strong, thick, and resistant to rot, which made them perfect supports in places where wood was scarce. You walk around the skeleton slowly, imagining early humans examining these bones with a mix of fear, awe, and opportunity. They would have seen the ribs as ready-made arches, natural curves that could form the skeleton of a hut. They would have noticed the tusks, smooth and heavy, perfect for reinforcing entrances or bracing the roof. You can picture someone tapping a tusk with a stone tool, listening to the deep, resonant sound that hums through it. You kneel beside a massive leg bone, trying to imagine the weight of it in your hands. You think of a small group working together to drag the bones toward their camp, their breaths puffing out in sharp bursts, their boots slipping in the snow. The process must have required immense strength and cooperation. A widely recognized detail in Ice Age studies is that mammoth bone shelters often featured dozens of bones arranged in careful patterns, sometimes forming circular houses large enough for extended families. You picture the planning, the decisions, the teamwork behind it. As you rise, a different thought forms. Some researchers have discovered that certain mammoth bone structures include decorative elements, such as beads, carvings, or animal skulls placed intentionally around the perimeter. This suggests that the shelters were not only practical, they were also expressions of identity or ritual significance. You imagine the soft clinking of beads carved from ivory, hanging from a rib like wind chimes that sing when the breeze passes through. You take a few steps back and begin to picture the assembly of a shelter. First the ribs, arranged upright in a ring or angled inward to create a dome. Then large bones forming crossbeams, tied together with sinew. Over that framework, hides would be draped, layered, and weighed down with stones around the base. The result would be a sturdy structure, able to withstand fierce storms. Inside, the heat from a fire would rise and collect near the ceiling, warming the curved walls of bone. You imagine stepping inside such a shelter. The interior glows with firelight bouncing off ivory surfaces. You hear the faint hiss of fat dripping onto flames, a soft crackle of burning wood, and the gentle murmur of voices. The bones reflect the warmth, giving the space an almost luminous feeling. You imagine how comforting that must have been in a world where darkness and cold pressed in from all sides. As you stand inside the imaginary structure, you sense how efficient this design could be. Thick walls, strong supports, heat retention improved by the circular shape. The hides covering the structure would block most drafts, transforming something enormous and lifeless into a place where warmth could settle. You leave the shelter and circle around to its entrance. You picture the opening reinforced with curved mammoth tusks. They lean inward slightly, creating a narrow passage that keeps wind from rushing in. You step through the imaginary doorway, imagining how children would peek out to watch snow fall while staying wrapped in hide blankets. You imagine elders sitting near the fire, shaping bone tools, and telling stories about hunts, spirits, and the frozen world outside. You run your fingers over another rib, still impressed by its size. You realize that structures like this could last for many years. Some researchers note that certain bone homes were repaired and rebuilt season after season, suggesting long-term occupation. Others propose that some shelters may have served as communal gathering spaces rather than everyday homes. There is ongoing discussion in the field about whether mammoth bone dwellings were built solely for harsh winter months or for ceremonial purposes as well. The uncertainty settles softly in your thoughts. You step away from the ribcage and look across the plain. You imagine a settlement of these bone houses, their curved shapes rising from the snow like white domes. Smoke floats upward from openings in their roofs. The sky is grey, but the glow of fires inside keeps the darkness at bay. The sound of scraping tools, murmured speech, and shifting snow mixes into a gentle rhythm. You kneel again beside the skeleton and examine the enormous skull. Its hollow sockets gaze outward at nothing. You imagine what it must have felt like for early humans to see one of these animals alive. The ground shaking, the breath streaming from its trunk in warm vapor, the challenge and danger of a hunt. Then the gratitude and relief once the animal provided food, clothing, tools, and shelter. Every part of the mammoth mattered. Nothing was wasted. The cold wind brushes lightly across your back, and you rise. You look at the bones with new understanding. To your ancestors, these were not relics. They were resources. They were opportunities in a world where survival depended on creativity more than anything else. You take a slow step forward, leaving behind the ribcage and its imagined shelter. As you walk, the land levels out again. Snow crunches beneath your boots, and the air feels sharp against your cheeks. You picture yourself carrying a small piece of bone, shaped into a tool handle or a spear point. Bone was more than building material. It connected you to the world around you, a reminder that survival often came from the same creatures humans hunted. You pause to glance back at the massive skeleton one last time. Its shadow stretches across the pale ground, long and quiet. In your mind, the bone house still stands beside it, warm inside, glowing softly like a lantern in the frozen night. Then you turn away and continue your journey, following the faint trail left by the people who knew how to build warmth out of the coldest materials in their world. You keep walking across the frost-covered plain, letting the memory of towering bones fade behind you. The world opens out once more into low hills and pale grasses, the wind gliding over them in long, sighing motions. You feel the cold brushing your cheeks, but it no longer surprises you. Every step into this ancient landscape teaches you something new about how early humans coaxed warmth from a world that rarely offered it freely. Now your gaze drifts toward a patch of ground where the colors shift from white to muted bronze. A field of tall grasses, their tips stiff with ice. but still standing. You step closer, and as your fingers brush the dry blades, a thought sparks in your mind. People learn not only to hunt or dig for shelter, they learn to weave. You bend slightly and pick up a handful of brittle grass. It crackles between your fingers, leaving pale dust on your skin. You close your eyes, imagining the same feeling in someone's hand thousands of years ago. They would have noticed how grasses bend without breaking, how reeds near rivers feel smooth and flexible, how mud dries into a tough crust. It is simple knowledge, but simple knowledge often builds miracles. You crouch, and your mind begins to drift into the work of ancient hands. One well-established observation from archaeological sites is that prehistoric communities wove grasses and reeds into mats, wall coverings, and even insulation layers for shelters. These woven sheets trapped warm air the same way modern insulation does. You picture a family sitting in a semicircle, fingers moving quickly, weaving strands over and under until the rhythm becomes soothing. The sound of reeds rubbing together fills the air like a soft whisper. You gather more imaginary grasses, twisting them between your palms. The fibers squeak faintly, and you picture yourself binding them into ropes. Ropes that can tie hides together, fasten wooden frames, or hang bundles of food out of reach of scavengers. You feel a small spark of admiration as you imagine the ingenuity behind such work. People did not simply survive here. They improved their world one braid at a time. As you rise, you look toward a frozen riverbed nearby. Tall reeds line the edge, their golden stalks waving under the weight of frost. You walk toward them, feeling the crispness of the ground beneath you. When you reach the bank, you kneel and place your hand on a reed. It bends gracefully, almost as if inviting you to pick it. You imagine cutting long reeds with a sharp flake of stone, laying them side by side, and building a mat large enough to cover the frame of a shelter. You run your fingers along the reed's smooth surface. A curious detail found in some ancient dwellings is that people mixed mud with chopped plant fibers to create a kind of early plaster. When it dried, it became surprisingly sturdy, sealing cracks and insulating the interior. You imagine scooping wet mud into your hands, mixing in bits of broken reed, and pressing the mixture against a wooden wall. The scent of damp earth fills your senses. Cool, raw, familiar. You stand and picture the construction of a wall. First, a row of wooden stakes driven into the ground in a rough arc. Then, bundles of reeds woven and tied between them. You imagine the soft rustle of the reeds as they shift with each knot you pull tight. After that, a thin layer of mud smeared across the surface, smoothing the pattern of the weave. When it dries, the wall becomes surprisingly tough, able to block cold wind and support a layer of hides. You step inside your imagined shelter, running your hand across the reed wall. It feels firm, and the faint scent of dried grasses greets you as if you are stepping into a warm barn. The air inside is still, far quieter than outside. You picture a fire at the center, its glow reflecting softly on the pale walls. Reed mats on the floor soften each step. Thick bundles of dried grass act as bedding. You lean down and press your hand into the bedding. It yields gently, releasing a faint, earthy aroma. You sit on the floor and listen to the stillness. You imagine someone entering behind you, carrying armfuls of new reeds harvested from the riverbank. Another person sorts them by thickness and length. A child watches, mimicking the simple movement of folding a strand into a loop. These repetitive actions, done day after day, must have created a natural rhythm in ancient communities, a rhythm of weaving, repairing, and improving their homes as seasons changed. You close your eyes briefly, letting the imagined warmth seep into your thoughts. Then another idea arrives, soft as falling snow. Some experts examining ancient living sites suggest that early humans may have used thick mats of woven grasses as portable walls, allowing them to expand or shrink their shelters depending on weather. These flexible dividers could be moved easily, creating private sleeping spaces or blocking drafts. You picture placing one such divider near the entrance of your shelter, narrowing the opening and keeping heat inside. You crawl toward the doorway and peek outside. The wind moves across the land in slow, sweeping motions. You step out of the shelter, feeling the temperature drop instantly. The contrast helps you understand how effective these natural materials could be when placed skillfully. The simplest things in nature, when combined with patient hands, can become powerful allies against the cold. You walk back toward the fields of tall grasses, letting your fingers trail along the stalks as you pass. The soft brush of the blades against your skin brings a small smile to your face. You picture early humans learning how different plants behaved, which grasses curled as they dried, which reeds cracked in the cold, which mixtures of mud and fibers held together best. You imagine elders passing down this knowledge with quiet confidence, showing younger members how to choose the right materials. Your steps carry you across a patch of frozen mud. You crouch and scrape a bit of it loose with your fingernail. It crumbles into powder, reminding you that some ancient building techniques likely varied depending on soil composition. Modern specialists continue to discuss how much planning went into these choices. Did people test different mixtures on purpose? Or did they simply adapt based on what felt right at the time? The question sits gently in your mind without demanding an answer. You straighten and walk along the riverbank one more time. The reeds sway softly, their dry leaves making a quiet, rattling sound. You imagine a whole village made from these materials. Low huts with rounded walls, roofs layered with mud, straw, and hides. Mats drying in the sun. Children gathering reeds while adults repair worn coverings. Warmth flickering inside each home at night, glowing gently beneath the sheltering skins. A gust of wind nudges at your side, and you take a final step away from the river. You run your fingers over a handful of grass one last time, and feel the simple magic of it. Humans learn to shape the land, but they also learn to listen to it, to notice the bend of grass, the strength of reed fibers, the stickiness of wet mud, and from these small observations they created walls that held the cold at bay. You continue walking, your path curving gently toward the next chapter of warmth. The ground crunches beneath your feet. The horizon glows faintly beneath a pale sky. Somewhere in your thoughts, you still hear the soft rustle of woven grass mats, welcoming you to rest. You leave the whispering reeds behind and continue across the frosty plain, feeling the cold settle once more against your skin. Each breath forms a pale cloud in the air, drifting slowly upward before fading into nothing. The land around you seems wider now, quieter, as if waiting for you to understand another part of the long story of survival. You walk a little farther, listening to the faint crunch of snow under your boots. Then a memory surfaces, something you have been following without noticing. Fire is warm when it burns, yes, but what about when you travel? What about when your shelter must follow the herd, the weather, or the shifting seasons? Early humans had to find ways to bring warmth with them. You pause on a small rise, scanning the horizon the way a hunter might have done long ago. There is no settlement in sight, no cluster of bones, no cave mouth, only open land. You imagine a band of nomads moving across it, carrying their belongings strapped to their backs, their breath rising like thin smoke in the cold. In your mind, you see the glow of something tucked into a pouch made of bark or hide. Not a roaring flame, only a smouldering ember, a tiny sun that must not die. You take a slow step forward and imagine holding such an ember in your gloved hands. It would feel warm and delicate, not hot enough to burn you, but alive with potential. A well-documented practice from ancient cultures shows that some groups carried living fire inside bundles of dry moss, wrapped securely with strips of bark. These ember bundles stayed warm for hours, sometimes even a full day, allowing travelers to start a new fire with only a few breaths and a handful of tinder. You imagine opening one of those bundles and seeing a small orange glow nested among soft fibers. You kneel on the ground and gather an imaginary handful of grass, twisting it gently to form the beginnings of a container. The fibers feel brittle from the frost, but you warm them a bit between your palms. You picture placing a coal the size of a berry in the center, then wrapping the bundle tight. The faint warmth radiates through your hands. You feel how precious it is. You remember how vulnerable a group becomes when night falls and no fire burns. As you stand, your mind paints a picture of a family traveling through snow-covered plains. The adults carry spears and tools. The children cling to blankets of hide. In the hands of one traveler, a pouch hangs from a leather strap, rocking slightly with each step. Inside it rests a living ember wrapped in plant fibers. Without it, starting a fire could take hours. With it, warmth waits only a few breaths away. You begin walking again, feeling the cold wind tug gently at your sleeves. You imagine how fire became a companion, almost a member of the group. It could be shared, protected, and even mourned when lost. There are accounts from various ancient traditions that describe rituals around preserving fire during long journeys. People might have carried it close to the chest under layers of clothing during storms, guarding it as carefully as a newborn. You picture yourself doing the same, holding the ember inside a hide pouch pressed against your body, feeling the warmth through the fur, sensing the tiny pulse of heat that means survival. You take a slow breath, allowing your imagination to wrap you in that same determination. The wind shifts slightly, and you notice the faint scent of dried grasses carried with it. Maybe it is only in your mind, but the idea leads you to another memory from the deep past. Some groups developed small ceramic containers for carrying embers once they learned to shape and fire clay. These containers were not full pots, but small lidded bowls with holes that allowed air to reach the ember without letting wind extinguish it. The clay would warm from the inside, glowing faintly in the dark like a sleeping creature. You imagine cupping one of these bowls in your hands, its surface warm against your palms while snowflakes melt instantly on contact. You walk along a narrow trail that curves between two low hills. The landscape feels more sheltered here, and the wind changes tone to a gentle murmur. You imagine a caravan of early humans walking in single file along this same path. You picture the person in the lead holding a smoldering bundle wrapped in bark. Another person carries dry kindling in a hide bag. Someone else keeps a bundle of reeds for torches. Each person contributes something to protect the warmth of the group. You pause and crouch near a small patch of ice. Beneath it lies frozen mud, cracked like ancient pottery. You touch the surface gently, imagining how early travelers would stop in similar places to rest. They would open the ember bundle, blow softly, and watch the glow brighten. The tiny ember would swell into a flame. A fire would rise, lighting the night and thawing cold hands. You picture the group gathering close, silent for a moment, grateful. The quiet crackling of new firewood sends sparks upward, disappearing into the dark. You remain crouched for a moment longer, feeling the weight of that image. Then you stand and continue walking. Another thought creeps into your mind, one that researchers still examine with interest. How far did people travel with these moving fires? Some experts propose that early humans could carry embers for several days, tending them constantly, checking them as often as one might check a sleeping infant. Others believe that groups frequently built short-lived fires along their routes, leaving behind small blackened patches that now lie hidden under centuries of soil. The evidence raises questions that no one has answered fully. You imagine following such a trail. You look down and picture the faint outline of a soot-stained patch in the snow, perhaps a place where someone once stopped to reheat their ember bundle. You kneel and brush the imaginary soot with your fingertips, feeling a connection across thousands of winters. You continue forward, and your thoughts drift to torches. A lit torch allowed travelers to carry not only fire, but also light through the darkness. Some communities dipped bundles of plant fibers in animal fat to make slow-burning torches that could last for hours. You imagine walking across a snowy plain at night, holding a torch that crackles softly, casting warm light over the pale ground. The glow creates the illusion of a moving star. You picture the trail behind you, dotted with footprints illuminated in orange light. You tighten your grip around the imaginary torch. The warmth radiates toward your face, shielding you from the cold. You take slow steps, imagining the sound of the flame rustling with each movement. You picture how early humans would use torches to frighten predators, signal others across long distances, or explore dark spaces where caves narrowed into hidden chambers. You step onto the crest of a hill, and the horizon opens before you. For a moment, the world feels vast and exposed. A long river snakes through the plain far ahead, its frozen surface gleaming like polished stone. You imagine a group approaching the river at dusk, their torches glowing in the dimming light. As they reach the riverbank, they set down their ember bundle, gather dry grasses, and spark a new fire. The flame catches quickly. Warmth rises once again. They sit close, sharing food, stories, and quiet hope. You look at the distant river and imagine walking in their footsteps. You imagine being responsible for the ember bundle, checking it every hour, blowing gently into it to keep the glow alive. It becomes your duty, your connection to everyone else, a task that demands patience, attentiveness, and care. You feel a small warmth in your chest as you imagine carrying that responsibility. You walk downhill now, heading toward the river in your mind. The cold settles softly around you, but you feel stronger against it. Your thoughts are filled with fire, not blazing in a hearth, but breathing quietly in your hands. Early humans learned that warmth could travel with them. They learned that a single glowing ember could carry hope across miles of frozen land. As you near the imagined riverbank, you picture placing the ember bundle on a flat stone. You untie the straps carefully. You open the layers of grass and bark. The ember glows faintly, pulsing like the heartbeat of the land itself. You blow gently. The glow brightens. A flame flickers into life. And in that small moment, you understand how warmth did not only come from shelters or hides or underground homes. Warmth also traveled. It moved with the people who protected it, carried it, nurtured it. A tiny flame that crossed plains, valleys, and frozen rivers, shaping the long journey of human survival. You walk along the frozen riverbank, listening to the faint crackle of ice shifting beneath the pale surface. The cold feels sharper now, the kind that slips beneath clothing and lingers against your skin. You wrap your imagined fur cloak tighter around your shoulders, and as you look across the open plain, a new idea rises slowly in your thoughts. Warmth does not only come from the shelters you build. Sometimes warmth comes from the things you wear, the layers that wrap your body like a personal home. Clothing itself becomes a kind of shelter, one you carry everywhere you walk. You take a slow breath and imagine standing in this same place thousands of years ago. Your feet would be wrapped in layers of hide, your legs tied with strips of fur, your chest covered with soft skins stitched together using sinew. There would be no synthetic fibers, no fleece, no waterproof boots. Everything you wore would be the product of hours of scraping, softening, and stitching. You picture early humans gathering around a hide, working together to prepare it. The smell of fresh leather fills your mind, slightly sweet and earthy. You crouch near the riverbank and run your hand over the icy ground. The cold radiates upward, reminding you how vital proper clothing must have been. One detail recognized in many excavations of prehistoric sites is that early people layered different types of hides according to the weather. Some hides were soft and insulating, perfect for inner layers. Others were tough and resistant to moisture, better for outer coverings. You imagine choosing the right combination before setting out into the snow, each layer making the cold feel a little less threatening. You stand and picture an early human fastening a cloak around the shoulders with a bone pin. The cloak would fall heavily down the back, the fur thick and warm. It might sway slightly with each step, brushing softly against the legs. You reach to adjust your own imaginary cloak, feeling the weight of it as if it were real. You walk a few steps, and imagine the sound of boots made from fur wrapped around the ankles and tied with sinew cords, the soft thud of each step, the faint swish of fur. A curious observation from some winter sites shows that people sometimes stuffed grasses inside their boots for extra insulation. You imagine sliding dried grasses into your own footwear, feeling the gentle cushion under your feet and the warmth it traps. Your thoughts turn toward your hands. You imagine sliding them into mittens made of double-layered hide, the inside soft, the outside smooth and tough. You curl your fingers together, sensing how the warmth collects in the small space. You remember cold nights when a single pair of gloves can make the difference between comfort and numbness. As you continue along the river, you begin seeing figures in your mind, a cluster of people preparing winter clothing before a long journey. Some scrape hides with stone tools. Some twist sinew strands for stitching. Others soften leather by pulling it back and forth between wooden beams. You walk through the scene quietly, listening to the rhythm of their work, the scraping, the stretching, the soft tapping of bone needles against hide. A detail that often surprises people studying early clothing practices is that bone needles with polished eyes have been found at sites tens of thousands of years old. These needles suggest careful sewing, intricate stitching, and perhaps even decorated garments. You imagine threading one of those needles, the thin strand of sinew sliding through your fingers. You picture sewing two hides together with slow, careful motions. You pause and look toward a cluster of tall rocks. You imagine using them as a windbreak while tailoring your clothing. You sit on a flat stone and let the scene unfold in your mind. Someone next to you is cutting small strips of hide to bind the cuffs of a boot. Another person is shaping a hood lined with fur on the inside. You picture placing the hood over your head, feeling warmth gather around your ears and neck. You take another breath, letting the cold air sting your nostrils. Then you imagine pulling a scarf-like garment around your lower face, made of soft fur, sewn into a long band. The warmth spreads across your cheeks. Your breaths become easier. The fabric smells faintly of smoke and animal hide. You walk again, each step measured and slow. Clothing like this allowed people to travel across icy plains without freezing. It let them hunt, gather, and build even during harsh winters. In a sense, every layer of clothing was a moving shelter. Your thoughts drift toward cultural variations. Some specialists examining ancient clothing remains suggest that certain groups shaped their garments differently depending on the region. Some designed hooded coats. Others created layered capes with overlapping sections. Some decorated their clothing with beads, feathers, or carved ivory pieces. These additions were not only artistic, they served practical purposes too, helping identify members of a group or marking achievements from a hunt. You imagine a mother teaching her child how to tie a set of bindings around the wrists and ankles. You imagine a father showing how to wrap a hood tightly before stepping into a blizzard. Knowledge passed through generations, not written in books but learned by touch, practice, and repetition. The air fills with the quiet sounds of instruction, a soft laugh, a gentle correction, the comforting scrape of hide being smoothed. You pause to watch the imagined group as they prepare for travel. They lift their arms, testing movement within their layers. They bounce lightly on their heels, checking how their boots grip the frozen ground. They shake out their cloaks so the fur settles neatly. Everything is intentional, purposeful, and shaped by the cold that presses upon them. Your path takes you to a small rise just above the river. From there, you look down at the frozen surface and imagine crossing it. The layers of clothing you picture yourself wearing suddenly feel essential. Without them, the river's icy breath would seep into your bones. With them, you could walk across it for hours. You imagine stepping onto the ice. Your boots squeak softly with each step. Your cloak flutters gently behind you. Your hood cuts the wind, and your mittens trap warmth around your hands. You feel protected, as if the clothing itself holds the strength of the people who crafted it. You reach the middle of your imagined crossing and pause. You look up at a sky dimmed by winter clouds. Snow begins to fall, thin flakes drifting lazily. They land on your cloak, clinging to the fur. They settle on your hood, but they melt slowly, because your clothing holds your heat close. You take one last breath before continuing your walk. Clothing has become your shelter, your warmth, your constant companion in the cold. You understand now that early humans did not simply wrap themselves in hides. They engineered warmth. They shaped it with needles, tied it with sinew, and wore it like armor against the coldest winters. Your footsteps carry you off the river and back onto solid ground. Snowflakes gather around your feet as you walk toward the next chapter of your journey, where even the coldest material in the world will become a surprising ally. You step off the solid ground and move toward a field of snow that stretches endlessly in soft waves. The surface looks fragile, almost weightless, like a blanket pulled tight across the land. Your boots sink slightly with each step, making a gentle crunch that echoes faintly in the still air. As the cold wraps around your ankles, a new idea settles quietly in your thoughts. Snow is bitter, yes. Snow is merciless when it falls in blinding storms, but snow can also hold warmth. It is one of the strangest truths of the ancient world, and one your ancestors learned by watching, experimenting, and surviving. You walk slowly into a shallow drift and kneel, scooping a handful of snow into your palm. It bites at your skin, stinging lightly, but when you press it together, you feel something familiar. Air trapped inside, tiny pockets hidden between crystals. You bring the snow closer to your face and breathe on it gently. A faint mist forms, and you realize how these tiny air pockets can hold warmth when arranged the right way. Snow is not just frozen water. It is a natural insulator, capable of muffling both sound and wind if shaped carefully. You let the snow fall from your hand and straighten your back, gazing across the white landscape. One well-known piece of information among archaeologists is that people living in extremely cold regions crafted snow shelters with surprising skill. Some of these structures, built from blocks of compacted snow, could maintain temperatures well above freezing, even when the world outside dipped far below it. You imagine stepping into one, leaving the wind behind, letting the stillness wrap around you like a blanket. You walk forward a few steps and picture how early builders would test the snow first. They would pat it with flat hands, listening for a dense, crisp sound that meant the snow was ready to block wind. You kneel and press the ground again, imagining that same sound echoing in your ears. You picture carving blocks with a bone tool or a sharpened stone, each block cut cleanly from the drift, each one lifted carefully and stacked in a curved pattern. You take a slow breath and imagine yourself building such a shelter. You begin by marking a rough circle in the snow with your boot. Then you step back and pick up an imaginary block, feeling its weight. It is heavier than you expect, but still easy enough to handle. You place it along the circle's edge, then another and another. The blocks lean inward slightly, each one supporting the next. Your arms move in a slow rhythm. Your breath fogs the air. The world around you falls quiet except for the soft scraping of snow. As you work, a memory of something unusual drifts into your thoughts. Accounts from cold climate cultures describe how snow blocks could be shaped with curved knives made of bone or ivory. These tools did not look like the sharp weapons you might expect. Instead, they were broad and smooth, shaped perfectly for carving clean edges. You imagine sliding one of these tools through the snow, watching the blocks separate with a satisfying sound. You pause to look at your growing wall. It rises slowly, curving toward the center. You imagine how the dome will take shape once the layers stack higher. You also consider the subtle design choices that must have been made. Some researchers propose that builders knew how to angle the blocks so wind would slide over the shelter instead of hitting it directly. Others suggest the construction was learned entirely through instinct and repetition. The question lingers softly in your mind. You lift another block and place it carefully. The wall grows taller, and you crouch inside the circular foundation. The wind outside begins to feel distant, muffled by the rising structure. You run your fingers along the inner surface. The snow feels cold but solid. You imagine smoothing the wall with a gloved hand to fill in gaps, sealing the cracks so that warm air will stay inside. You take a few steps back, feeling the space shrink around you as the dome closes above your head. You imagine setting the final keystone block at the top, completing the structure. When you press it into place, the shelter becomes whole. The walls hold. The ceiling curves gracefully, forming a perfect arch. You step through a small tunnel-like entrance carved into the side and crawl inside. The world outside fades. Inside the snow shelter, the air feels still, quiet, protected. The temperature is surprisingly mild, helped by the insulation of thick snow walls. You imagine placing a fur mat on the floor, sitting with your knees pulled close, your breath warming the air with each exhale. The silence inside is deep, almost calming. Snow absorbs sound, leaving you in a peaceful cocoon that blocks the relentless wind. You picture others entering behind you. They move slowly, careful not to disturb the walls. The glow of a small lamp made from animal fat flickers softly, casting warm light on the smooth interior. Shadows dance gently, turning the curved dome above into a living canvas. You feel the warmth from the flame gathering slowly inside the shelter, held by the snow itself. You run your hand along the wall and marvel at how something so cold can also protect so well. You imagine lying down on a bed of soft furs, listening to the faint hum of wind outside but feeling none of its bite. The snow becomes your shield, not your enemy. You crawl back out through the tunnel and stand again in the open air. Snowflakes drift around you, settling lightly on your clothing. You glance back at the imaginary shelter and think about how flexible snow can be. Early humans in cold regions used it not only for walls but also to block wind around hide shelters, insulate pits, and even create storage spaces for food. You imagine stacking snow against the lower part of a hide tent, sealing the gaps where cold air might slip in. You picture packing snow around a mammoth bone structure, strengthening it during storms. You kneel once more and scoop up a handful of snow. This time, instead of letting it fall, you imagine placing it along the base of a shelter wall, packing it tight. The snow hardens slightly under your pressure, forming a smooth barrier. You stand again and feel a quiet satisfaction. Even the simplest resources, when used wisely, could become powerful allies. Your thoughts drift toward the cultural interpretations of snow building. Some specialists believe that builders shaped the interior of snow shelters not only for efficiency but also for comfort. Curved walls distributed heat more evenly. Raised sleeping platforms kept people warmer. A small ceiling vent allowed smoke from lamps to escape. It is possible that these details emerged from years of experimentation, each generation improving the technique naturally. You take a slow step away from your imagined shelter and walk through the drift. The wind picks up slightly, brushing your face with icy fingertips. You picture yourself leaning against the outside wall during a blizzard, listening to the muffled world within. The snowbound home stands firm, keeping the storm at bay. Your steps continue across the plain, leaving faint tracks behind you. The sky grows a little darker, and the air grows heavier with the scent of approaching snow. You walk calmly through it, feeling the same quiet confidence you imagine early humans once carried. They learned to shape snow, to mold it, to trust it. They learned that even the coldest material can become a source of safety. As you move onward, the horizon begins to rise in gentle slopes. Somewhere beyond those hills lies the next lesson in warmth. But for now, you carry the soft silence of the snow shelter with you, its curved walls still glowing faintly in your imagination. You leave the soft stillness of the snow shelter behind and begin walking toward a stretch of the landscape where scattered stones rise from the ground like forgotten markers. They vary in shape and size, some round and weathered, others sharp-edged and stubbornly rooted in frozen soil. As you approach, the wind shifts direction and pushes lightly at your side. You turn your face toward it and instantly understand why these stones mattered. In a world where the cold could steal breath and life with one strong gust, early humans learned to tame the wind with simple circles of rock. You crouch beside one of the stones and brush your palm across its surface. It feels cold, gritty, and surprisingly solid beneath your hand. You imagine lifting it, feeling its weight pull against your muscles, Early humans would have carried stones like these from nearby riverbeds or hillsides, choosing pieces heavy enough to stand firm but manageable enough to move. A widely accepted observation in studies of ancient campsites is that rock arrangements appear in patterns clearly meant to shield fires from wind. These rings helped flames survive long nights, turning fragile sparks into dependable warmth. You rise to your feet and scan the area. You picture a cold evening thousands of years ago. A group of travelers gather around a fire pit, trying to coax a flame from dry grass. The wind pushes from every direction, threatening to snuff out every ember. But then someone begins placing rocks around the fire, forming a barrier. The stones block the wind in just the right way, bending the cold air around the flames instead of through them. You take a slow step forward and imagine yourself building such a circle. You crouch and lift an imaginary stone, feeling its weight settle into your hands. You set it down gently, then choose another, arranging them in a ring. Each stone leans into the next, forming a low wall. You adjust a few pieces, tilting them slightly so they catch the wind at an angle. The moment the circle forms, you feel it, an invisible bubble of quiet, a protected space where fire can breathe. You sit beside your ring and look outward across the snowy plain. Wind moves in thin lines over the ground, sliding around the stones instead of through the center. You imagine placing a handful of twigs inside the ring and striking flint. Sparks fall into the nest of grass, glowing softly. You blow gently, and the flame rises, sheltered from the wind. The circle becomes a small sanctuary of heat. You reach out and touch one of the stones again. You imagine how warm it becomes when the fire burns long enough. That stored heat radiates back into the shelter, adding another layer of comfort. A curious detail sometimes mentioned in studies of prehistoric living spaces is that stones warmed by fire were occasionally moved to sleeping areas to provide heat after the flames died down. You picture carrying one of these warm stones carefully in your gloved hands, placing it beside your bedding to keep the night from feeling unbearable. You look beyond your ring to a taller rock standing by itself. Its surface is rough and jagged, shaped by centuries of wind. You picture using such a rock as a natural windbreak, positioning your camp on the sheltered side. Early groups often selected locations based on how wind flowed through the terrain. They watched how smoke drifted, how snow collected, and how grasses bent. They learned to place their shelters strategically, letting the land itself block the cold. You approach the tall rock and place your palm against its side. It shields you immediately, the wind sliding harmlessly past. You imagine setting your fire at the base, the rock reflecting heat back toward you. You imagine leaning your back against it, feeling the warmth spread slowly upward. As you continue walking, your gaze falls upon a cluster of stones forming a rough semicircle. You kneel beside it, sensing another layer of ancient knowledge. Some archaeologists propose that early humans placed stones not only to block wind, but also to guide it. By angling stones in specific ways, they could direct air to feed oxygen to the fire without letting the gusts extinguish it. The idea sits gently in your mind, a quiet combination of observation and intuition. You stand and begin arranging more imaginary stones. You tilt one slightly outward, another slightly inward. You test the flow of air with your breath, watching how it travels. Even in your imagination, you can feel the subtle change. The space inside the ring becomes a small pocket where heat gathers more easily. As you work, the wind picks up for a moment, brushing your hair back. You look around and imagine an entire campsite made with wind guidance in mind. Shelters positioned behind boulders, snow piled against the windward side of tents, trails chosen based on wind direction, every decision shaped by where the cold traveled. You sit among the stones and look at the horizon, thinking of how people learned these techniques. Some specialists believe early humans observed how animals used natural formations to escape the wind. Others propose that careful trial and error shaped these practices over generations. It is possible that both ideas are true, merging slowly into a body of knowledge passed from parent to child. You pick up another stone and place it near your feet. Its surface feels rough under your fingertips. You imagine using stones not only for windbreaks but also for heating. When placed directly in the fire, stones absorb warmth. When moved to the edge of a shelter, they release that warmth gradually. You imagine lining the floor of a hide shelter with warm stones, turning an icy night into something close to comfort. You take a slow breath and rise again. You walk a few steps away and look back at the circle you made. It is simple, nothing more than a ring of stones sitting quietly on the ground. Yet in your mind you feel the power of it, a barrier against the wind, a cradle for fire, a symbol of survival built from the simplest materials. You continue walking through the scattered stones, stepping between them as if walking through the remains of ancient camps. You imagine old windbreaks, long collapsed, fire pits filled with blackened ash, circles that once glowed with orange light beneath the winter sky. Your path curves gently upward toward a slope where the wind shifts again. It brushes against your face, colder now, but you feel ready for it. You understand how stones guided early hands, how they shaped the movement of air, how they helped build warmth in a world that rarely offered it. Ahead of you lies the next part of the journey, a place where fire and shelter meet in the thin line between comfort and danger. But for now, you take one last glance at your stone ring, feeling the quiet wisdom it carries. You walk away from the scattered stones and climb a gentle rise where the wind flows a little faster. The cold brushes your cheeks in thin lines, not painful, just persistent, like the land reminding you that warmth must be earned. Ahead of you, the slope curves into a shallow basin. As you descend, you notice something different about the air. It feels heavier, almost trapped. You pause and breathe slowly, sensing what this valley is trying to teach you. Warmth is not only about building walls, it is also about allowing smoke to escape without letting heat disappear. Early humans had to solve one of the most delicate puzzles of survival: how to vent their shelters. You walk deeper into the basin until you reach a cluster of rocks arranged in what looks like a broken doorway. You step inside the imagined outline of a shelter and picture a fire burning in the center. The flame crackles. Sparks drift upward. Smoke gathers quickly in the air above you. Without proper venting, the shelter fills with thick haze that stings the eyes and clogs the lungs. You cough lightly just thinking about it. You crouch down, remembering that ancient shelters often had clever openings designed to guide smoke upward while keeping precious heat inside. You sit on a patch of frost-hardened earth and imagine a simple hide tent. The fire sits low, far from the walls. Above it, a small flap opens near the top. When the wind blows, the flap shifts slightly, allowing smoke to drift outward without letting cold air pour in. Archaeologists often find remains of such ventilation designs in the form of charred roof sections or patterned soot on cave ceilings. These clues reveal that people learned to manage airflow with surprising refinement. You reach up and imagine adjusting a hide flap tied with sinew. The material swings softly, creating a small tunnel for smoke to escape. Warm air remains inside, held by the low ceilings and insulating walls. You can almost feel the balance between oxygen, smoke, and heat settling into place. You picture someone tending the fire, poking the coals so they burn evenly. Another person kneels near the vent, checking whether the smoke rises cleanly. This simple choreography keeps the shelter safe through long winter nights. You shift your weight and imagine being inside a deeper, heavier structure, like a mammoth bone hut covered in multiple layers of hide. In such a space, smoke would collect fast without careful planning. You picture a narrow shaft carved between the bones, rising gently above head height. The opening is small, but enough to release smoke in a steady stream. A common interpretation among researchers is that these shafts might have been created intentionally, using curved bones as natural channels. You slide your fingertip along an imaginary bone surface, feeling where someone once carved a groove for smoke to follow. You rise and step outside the imagined shelter, looking toward the horizon. A thin line of snow dances in the wind. You picture early humans learning how smoke behaved by simply watching it. They saw how it swirled along ceilings, how it gathered in corners, how it escaped through cracks. They likely experimented with different hole sizes, different flap shapes, and different construction materials to find the ideal balance between warmth and safety. You kneel beside a low, flat rock and imagine placing heated stones around the edge of your fire to keep it stable. The warmth radiates outward. The smoke rises. You picture a small hole near the top of the hide covering, held open by a curved stick. The stick bends gently under its own weight, creating a funnel where smoke threads through the air like a slow-moving ribbon. You turn to your left and imagine a group living inside a semi-underground pit home. The roof, made from branches and hides, sits just above the frozen soil. Inside this close space, smoke would gather quickly if left unattended. You picture a small vent channel carved at an angle through the upper wall, slanting upward toward the outside. A few researchers suggest that such angled vents prevented cold air from rushing inward, while allowing hot air to push smoke outward. You imagine placing your hand near the vent, feeling a thin current of warm air rising past your fingertips. You close your eyes and picture the shelter filled with people. A baby wrapped in fur sleeps near its mother. An elder carefully shapes a bone point by firelight. Someone stirs a pot of heated broth, and fragrant steam fills the room. Everything depends on the vent working properly. Too small and smoke builds. Too large and the warmth escapes too quickly. The quiet precision of this design makes you feel a gentle respect for the intelligence of early builders. You stand again and look toward a natural cave mouth farther down the basin. You walk toward it, stepping carefully over patches of icy ground. When you reach the entrance, you step inside and breathe deeply. Caves bring their own airflow. Cool air sinks, warm air rises. People learn to position fires in specific spots where the cave's natural draft would pull smoke away. You imagine placing your fire near a side channel that rises gradually toward a hole in the ceiling. Smoke drifts upward, disappearing into darkness. You watch it fade from sight. You touch the cave wall and feel the roughness beneath your fingertips. You imagine blackened soot stains left behind by countless fires. These marks speak of nights spent telling stories, sharpening tools, and resting in relative comfort. They also reveal something about airflow patterns. Soot tends to settle where smoke lingers longest. Researchers sometimes study these stains to understand how ancient people learned to vent smoke with uncanny precision. You walk deeper into the cave and hear the faint echo of dripping water. You picture how moisture adds another layer of complexity. Wet air can make smoke behave unpredictably. Warm air carrying steam rises more slowly. People must have noticed these changes and adapted their vents accordingly. You imagine someone reaching up to adjust a leather flap, widening the vent to guide more smoke outside. You step back out into the open air and take a slow breath. The wind catches your hair and pulls it lightly behind you. You turn your face toward the breeze and imagine an early builder studying the wind in the same way, watching how it flows across a valley, observing how it curls around a cliff, learning how to use these patterns to vent a shelter more effectively. You kneel once again beside your imagined fire ring and picture the way smoke moves. Soft at first, spiraling upward, then more defined as the flames grow stronger. You blow gently to test the airflow. You feel the warmth on your cheeks. You lean back and admire the clean curl of smoke disappearing into the sky. You rise slowly and begin walking again, letting the cold settle around you without fear. Venting shelters required patience, awareness, and quiet experimentation. It demanded that early humans listen to the air, to the land, to the fire itself. In doing so, they discovered how to create safe spaces filled with warmth and breathable air even in the harshest of winters. Ahead, the ground slopes once more. You sense the next chapter waiting, where warmth comes not only from fire or shelter, but from the closeness of the people who shared the night with you. You follow the slope downward, letting the wind soften into gentle threads that slip past your ears. The cold still lingers, but it no longer feels quite as sharp. Maybe it is because you have walked through so many shelters already in your imagination. Maybe it is because the land feels quieter here, calmer, as if inviting you to understand the simplest source of warmth humans ever discovered. You take a few more steps, and the truth settles naturally into your thoughts. Even the best shelters, the strongest fires, and the cleverest vents could only do so much. Sometimes warmth came from bodies resting close together. Human closeness became its own kind of shelter. You walk slowly into a small hollow between two hills. The ground is protected from the wind, and the snow lies in smooth drifts rather than harsh ridges. You kneel and flatten your palm against the snow. It feels firm, slightly crusted on top, softer beneath. As you stand again, you picture a small group of people gathering in such a hollow at night, their cloaks wrapped tight, their breaths rising like steam, their bodies pressed close to share heat in the simplest, most instinctive way. You step farther into the hollow, and the air feels different here, more still. You imagine crouching with your back against a hide-covered wall inside a shelter. A fire glows gently in the center. The warmth spreads outward, but not far enough. To hold on to it, people draw near one another. They sit shoulder to shoulder. They sleep huddled together. The closeness traps pockets of warm air between their layers of fur. You lower yourself onto an imagined fur mat and feel how warmth builds slowly when bodies gather. A commonly noted observation from studies of prehistoric living habits is that communal sleeping was normal, not out of sentiment but out of survival. A row of people, lying side by side under shared hides, could maintain comfortable temperatures even in severe cold. You picture yourself sliding under a thick blanket of fur, feeling another person's warmth at your back, and realizing how quickly the cold eases. You look around the hollow and picture how families would arrange themselves. Children in the middle, protected from drafts. Elders slightly closer to the fire. Adults on the outer edge, ready to rise if needed. A soft murmur of breathing fills the shelter, rising and falling like the rhythm of waves. You imagine reaching out and placing your hand near someone's arm, sensing the warmth radiating from their skin through layers of hide. You inhale slowly, letting the peace of that imagined closeness settle over you. Then your mind drifts to something less obvious. Some groups used heated stones placed between sleeping bodies or under hides to extend the warmth even further. You imagine sliding such a stone beneath your blanket. The heat touches your side gently, reinforcing the shared warmth around you. The effect must have been incredibly comforting on long winter nights. As you sit in the hollow, another thought rises gently into your mind. Researchers studying early social structures often point out that these shared sleeping arrangements encouraged strong communal bonds. People talked quietly before sleep. They whispered stories, soothed frightened children, and smoothed the worries of the day. The warmth created by closeness was not just physical, it was emotional, a layer of comfort that held families together through storms and darkness. You shift your position and imagine yourself lying on your side, listening to someone next to you breathe in slow, steady rhythm. Outside, the wind pushes lightly against the shelter walls, but you remain warm inside the cluster of bodies. The sounds outside feel distant now. Inside, the fire crackles, the hides rustle softly, and the steady breathing forms a calming harmony. You imagine waking up in the middle of the night. The embers still glow faintly. Someone beside you shifts in their sleep. You reach out to adjust the hide blanket, pulling it a little tighter. The warmth remains steady. The cold cannot break through easily when bodies rest in a close circle, sharing heat through every layer of fur. You rise from your imagined resting place and stand in the hollow. The memory of that warmth stays with you, lingering softly against your skin. You look around and picture how different groups shaped their communal sleeping practices. Some formed tight circles, others slept in long rows. Some groups even created raised platforms so people could sleep above the cold ground, their shared heat rising and collecting around them. A gentle question drifts into your thoughts, one that many specialists still consider when reviewing ancient dwellings. How much did these shared sleeping patterns influence social bonds, decision-making, or even group structure? Did sleeping close together encourage cooperation? Did it shape the way people trusted one another? The answer remains uncertain, yet the possibilities are comforting. You continue walking through the hollow, each step slow and thoughtful. You picture the warmth generated by shared bodies in tiny hide tents and larger communal shelters. You imagine mothers rocking young children under furs. You imagine friends whispering jokes before sleep, muffling their laughter to avoid disturbing others. You imagine elders telling quiet lessons, their voices soft under the blanket of night. You stop near a smooth rock and sit on it, imagining the first light of morning filtering into a shelter. People begin to stir. Someone yawns. Someone stretches beneath the warm hides. A child nudges closer for a few more minutes of shared warmth. The fire flares as someone adds new fuel. The cold outside remains harsh, but inside, the shared heat has made the night manageable. You rise and let the cold breeze touch your face again. It no longer feels so heavy. Human warmth follows you like an invisible cloak as you climb out of the hollow. You picture the long line of ancestors who survived not just through shelter or fire, but through closeness. Their shared breaths, their shared space, and the simple warmth of body against body made the difference between life and frost. You step toward the next rise, carrying the memory of that warmth as steadily as someone once carried an ember bundle. Ahead lies another lesson in surviving the deep cold, one built from stone, heat, and patience. You climb out of the quiet hollow and return to the open plain where the cold flows freely once more. The wind brushes your cheeks in thin, icy strokes, reminding you how easily warmth slips away out here. But now you are thinking about something more controlled, something placed carefully near a fire, heated until glowing, then carried with care. You take a slow step forward and picture a simple stone held in two hands, radiating gentle heat. Early humans discovered that fire could store warmth inside the very bones of the earth. Heated stones became night companions, slow-burning reservoirs of comfort that carried warmth long after the flames faded. You walk until you reach a cluster of rocks scattered near a dried riverbed. Their surfaces are rounded from years of water flow, their colors muted grays and browns. You kneel beside one and rest your palm on it. The stone is cold, firm, unmoving, but in your imagination, it begins to change. You picture placing this stone near a fire, letting the flame lick along its side until it absorbs heat deep into its core. A piece of ancient knowledge, found in many cold region archaeological sites, is that people used heated stones to warm their sleeping areas or create makeshift radiators that continued glowing long after fires died. You stand and pick up the imaginary stone, feeling the heavy weight pull at your arms. At first it is cold, but you imagine how it would feel after resting beside a fire, warm but safe to touch, glowing in the dark with a heat that seeps slowly into fingers and joints. You press it against your chest for a moment in your mind, and the warmth spreads beautifully through the layers of your imagined clothing. You set the stone down gently and begin collecting more. In your mind, you gather smooth stones, placing them around a small fire pit. The flames flicker, orange and gold, casting moving shadows across the snow. The stones begin to heat, their surfaces growing warm enough to radiate comfort long after the fire burns low. You squat down and hold your hands near them. Even here, in this imagined moment, you feel something soothing in the way the stones hold the fire's memory. You continue circling the pit, arranging the rocks with quiet intention. A curious detail noted in some studies is that people sometimes carried heated stones into hide shelters at night. Placed beneath layers of fur or tucked into pits dug beside sleeping areas, the stones released warmth slowly, pushing back the cold through long winter darkness. You imagine carrying such a stone carefully into a shelter, placing it near where someone rests. The person sighs softly as the warmth reaches them. You crouch once more, and imagine how the stones crackle gently under extreme heat, releasing faint pops as hidden moisture expands. You picture early humans learning which stones to choose. Some stones shattered when heated, Others held heat safely. People learned through observation and trial, passing down the knowledge that river stones and dense rocks held warmth better. You sit on a low stone and picture the nighttime routine. A group gathered around a low fire, waiting for the stones to reach the right temperature. Someone tests one with a careful touch. Someone else arranges blankets or hides inside the shelter. The fire crackles softly. Sparks float upward like tiny stars. When the stones are ready, each person carries one indoors using thick layers of hide. Inside, the shelter glows faintly as the warm stones radiate their heat. You imagine lying down beside one. The warmth touches your skin gently, not like the harsh bite of fire, but like a hand resting on your shoulder. You inhale the comforting smell of warm earth rising from the stone. You close your eyes and picture yourself drifting into sleep, trusting that the heat will last until morning. You stand again, letting the imagined warmth fade back into the cold air around you. Then you walk toward another cluster of rocks farther up the slope. These stones are larger, shaped like natural seats. You imagine a group sitting around a fire, each person leaning against a stone warmed by hours of flame. The heat radiates through their backs, easing the tension built from long days of travel. As you walk among the rocks, another ancient practice drifts into your thoughts. In some regions, people place stones directly into water, heated over a fire to create primitive steam or warm baths. These hot stones turned icy water into something healing, cleansing, and comforting. You picture lowering a glowing stone into a wooden or hide-lined container of cold water. Steam rises immediately, carrying the scent of earth and heat into the air. You imagine someone dipping their hands into the warm water, sighing softly with relief. You turn your attention to the shape of the landscape around you. A small groove in the earth catches your eye. You walk to it and kneel. You imagine placing heated stones along such grooves to warm the interior of a shelter from the ground up. The stones would radiate warmth through the night, keeping the cold soil from draining heat away. The design is simple but clever, the kind of technique that likely emerged from years of quiet experimentation. You lean back on your hands, studying the slope and the open plain. You picture an entire community using heated stones in different ways, to warm sleeping mats, to heat food, to create steam for cleaning hides, or simply to bring a comforting presence into a shelter. These stones would become tokens of warmth shared among the group. You rise once more and step toward a tall boulder that towers above you. You place your hand on its side and imagine how a large stone like this could hold warmth for hours after a fire burned beside it. The boulder warms slowly, absorbing energy during the evening and releasing it throughout the night. You imagine leaning against it inside a shelter built closely to its base. The stone becomes a silent partner in your survival, a wall of ancient heat watching over you while you rest. As you step away from the boulder, the wind picks up slightly, brushing your cheeks with cold air, yet the memory of heat lingers on your skin. Early humans learned to take warmth from the earth itself, storing fire's strength inside stones and carrying that strength through long, freezing nights. You walk toward the next rise, listening to the crunch of frost beneath your feet. The air grows still for a moment, as if the world pauses to acknowledge the quiet wisdom of those who warmed stones beneath ancient fires. You feel the glow of those stones lingering in your imagination, ready to follow you into the next part of your journey, where even darkness itself begins to soften with the light of simple lamps. You walk away from the slope of warmed stones and follow a narrow path where the light seems to fade more quickly. Evening settles over the land, pulling long shadows across the snow. The cold deepens. Your breath forms clouds that drift upward and vanish in the dim air. As darkness gathers, one truth becomes impossible to ignore. Fire warms the body, yes, but light warms the spirit. Early humans knew the fear and loneliness that came with pitch-black nights. They found ways to push back the darkness with small, steady flames. Lamps made from animal fat became the gentle glow that softened winter nights and turned shelters into places of calm. You take a slow step, and imagine holding a small bowl carved from stone or shaped from clay. Its surface feels rough beneath your fingers. Inside the bowl lies a pale, waxy substance, melted and rendered animal fat. You picture dipping a strip of twisted plant fiber or dried moss into the fat until it soaks completely. When lit, it becomes a flame that burns low and steady, filling the shelter with warm light. You kneel in the snow and imagine placing such a lamp at your feet. A well-known detail from many cave sites is the discovery of these ancient lamps, soot-stained and worn smooth from use. Their designs vary, but their purpose stays the same: to create light without wasting precious fuel. You imagine striking flint, seeing the spark catch on the wick, and watching the flame swell into a soft golden glow. You lift your imagined lamp and feel how the warmth spreads across your hand. It is not a fierce heat, nothing like a roaring fire. It is gentle, comforting, a flame that seems to whisper reassurance. You picture walking into a small hide tent with this lamp held carefully in your palm. The darkness retreats immediately, revealing the curved walls, the mats on the floor, the quiet shapes of people resting. You crouch and place the lamp beside you. The flame flickers as if greeting you. You notice how the light reflects off the snow outside, making the night feel less empty. A curious detail noted by some researchers is that early humans shaped lamp wicks from multiple materials, including dried lichen, animal sinew, and even strands of hair twisted together. These wicks burned slowly and evenly, giving families enough light to prepare tools, sew hides, or simply talk quietly after nightfall. You lower your chin slightly, letting the glow play across your face. The light reveals a small circle around you, and in that circle you feel safe. You imagine how early humans used lamps to guide them inside dark caves. The flame would cast dancing shadows across the walls, making painted figures flicker as though alive. You picture walking deeper into such a cave, lamp raised, the light discovering ancient handprints, painted animals, and forgotten tracks. You walk farther into your imagined scene and step into a small shelter made of reeds and hides. You place the lamp near the center, watching as the warm glow fills the space. A child swaddled in fur shifts slightly, the light reflecting off their closed eyes. An adult kneels on the floor, scraping a hide with a bone tool, the lamp illuminating each careful stroke. The air carries a soft scent of melted fat, earthy and warm. You take a deep breath and imagine leaning closer to the lamp. A question rises in your mind, one that specialists still discuss. How did early people discover the right balance of materials for these lamps? Did they experiment deliberately, or did the technique evolve gradually as people observed how different fats burned? The idea settles gently, like a puff of smoke curling toward the roof of a shelter. You turn your attention to the flame itself. It wavers with each movement of the air, but you see how its shape stabilizes when placed behind a stone or hidden inside a shallow pit. Early builders learned quickly that even a small lamp needed protection. You imagine shaping a small niche in a shelter wall, placing the lamp inside it so the wind cannot reach. The light shines steadily, filling the space with a soft, golden curtain. You rise and step outside again, holding your imagined lamp close. The ground crunches under your boots and the flame sways gently. You imagine using such a lamp to guide your way through a dark night when no moon shines. The snow reflects the glow, turning the ground ahead into a faint path of shimmering white. Each step feels safer with that tiny flame leading you forward. You pause near a smooth boulder and place the lamp on its surface. The rock warms slightly beneath the flame, creating a small pocket of comfort in the cold evening air. You sit beside it and imagine early humans gathering around similar lamps not just for light, but for company. Lamps created a center, a place where people sat close, shared food, told stories, or simply rested in silence while the wind whispered outside. You brush your fingers through the air above the flame, feeling the soft warmth. You imagine another lamp beside it, then another, a cluster of small lights filling a shelter with a gentle glow. You picture women sewing, their bone needles catching the light, men carving tools, children tracing shapes in the dirt. The shadows shift across their faces, warm and alive. You stand again, holding the lamp carefully. You walk a few steps and imagine how these simple flames guided people through storms, through long nights, and through dark winters. You picture placing a lamp near the entrance of a shelter, marking home for those returning from a hunt. You imagine lamps lining the inside of a larger winter dwelling, creating a soft ring of warmth around the space. As you continue walking, the flame burns steadily. It feels like a quiet friend in your hand, something small but deeply comforting. The cold does not feel as heavy with the glow beside you. You begin to understand how early humans relied on these tiny lights. They were more than tools. They were symbols of safety, warmth, and life pushing back against the darkness. You reach the top of a small rise and turn to look back at the path you walked. The imagined lamps glow in your mind like scattered stars, each one protecting a family, a child, a group huddled inside a shelter built from hides, reeds, or bones. The world may have been harsh, but light softened its edges. You continue walking toward the next part of your journey, where these small fires will illuminate not only warmth, but the growing structure of the early camps that humans began to build together. You leave the soft glow of the imagined lamp behind and continue across the frozen plain, noticing how the darkness returns in gentle waves. But now, the night feels less threatening. The memory of warm lights follows you like a quiet companion, and you can almost sense how those tiny flames led to something larger. People did not wander forever without pattern. Little by little, their temporary shelters grew into something more organized. You walk toward a stretch of land where the snow is broken into faint lumps and hollows, as if the ground itself remembers the shape of old encampments. In your mind, scattered tents begin to form around you, their shapes simple at first, then slowly more intentional. You take a slow breath and picture early nomads moving across icy landscapes, stopping wherever the land offered shelter or resources. At first, their camps might have been nothing more than a single hide tent or a hurried windbreak, but over time, patterns emerged. A food storage spot, a working area, a sleeping place, a circular layout where tents faced inward. People learned that order helped them survive. A familiar detail in studies of ancient nomadic groups is that seasonal campsites sometimes show repeated arrangements, suggesting that even while traveling, groups developed preferred layouts that balanced protection and space. You kneel and trace a rough circle in the snow with your gloved finger. You imagine placing a hide tent on one side, then another, then building a small shelter for tools or food. Fires are placed strategically so their heat spreads without risk. With each new shelter you picture, the camp becomes a little more organized, a little more like a temporary village. You rise and walk toward an imagined tent made from layers of hide stretched over wooden poles. The entrance faces inward, toward the heart of the camp. You lift the flap and look inside. A bed of furs rests on the floor. A tiny lamp flickers gently. The air feels warm. You picture adults securing the tent with sinew cords, their hands quick and practiced. You picture children gathering small stones to weigh down the edges against the wind. As you step back outside, a playful gust sweeps between the imagined shelters. The camp stands firm, each structure braced against the wind by careful placement. You walk toward the center of the settlement and picture a communal fire burning. People sit around it, sharing food or shaping tools. The firelight dances across their faces. The atmosphere feels alive, a shared bubble of warmth in the frozen vastness. You walk between two tents and picture the practical magic behind these early camps. Some researchers point out that nomadic groups often assigned consistent roles for setting up camp: who gathered wood, who built the windbreaks, who prepared the hides. This pattern created efficiency. You imagine watching a team raise a larger shelter, their movements fluid from years of practice. A hide is lifted, a pole is set, a knot is tied. Soon a sturdy structure rises from the snow. You continue walking, feeling the packed snow beneath your feet. You imagine stepping into a shelter used for storing food. Inside, cold air is kept trapped, turning the space into a natural refrigerator. Dried meat hangs from cords stretched between the poles. Wooden bowls and stone tools sit neatly along one wall. The orderliness surprises you. You realize the nomads did not live chaotically. Their temporary camps were carefully arranged spaces that balanced function and comfort. You step out and turn your gaze toward a different kind of structure. A large communal tent stands near the center of camp. Its roof is higher, its walls thicker. You walk toward it, imagining its purpose. Meetings, storytelling, tool-making. In some archaeological sites, evidence suggests that larger structures existed for gathering, possibly for rituals, meals, or winter discussions about hunting routes. You lift the flap and step inside. The space feels warm and open. A fire burns low. People sit in a circle, speaking quietly, while shadows sway across the walls. You sit for a moment and listen to those imagined voices. Someone sharpens a bone tool. Someone else heats water with a hot stone. A child leans against a parent, half asleep. The feeling inside this space is one of protection and shared life. The camp is not simply a place to sleep. It is a temporary community, shaped by the cold and strengthened by cooperation. You rise and step outside again. You walk toward a row of smaller shelters built close together. You imagine how families grouped their tents, leaving narrow pathways between them. These little corridors block wind and help retain heat in the camp. You picture snow piled against the walls for extra insulation. You crouch and press your hand against the base of one tent. The layers feel thick and sturdy, built with intention rather than haste. You stand again and let your imagination wander to how camps changed over generations. Some specialists suggest that as people learn new techniques for warmth and construction, their camps grew more complex. Roofs were reinforced. Entrances faced specific directions. Fire pits were lined with stones to control airflow. These choices were not random. They were learned slowly through experience, trial, and observation. A quiet question reaches your thoughts. Did these temporary structures serve as early steps toward permanent homes? Did the patterns people repeated in their nomadic camps influence the way they eventually built settled villages? There is ongoing discussion among researchers about whether organized camps were the foundation of early community planning or simply practical responses to winter challenges. You let the question linger gently. You continue exploring the camp in your mind. You pass a shelter dedicated to working hides, with tools laid neatly on a flat piece of wood. You walk beside another tent where the scent of cooked roots fills the air. You imagine the laughter of children playing in the snow outside, their warm clothing wrapped tightly around them. The camp feels alive with movement. You stop near the edge of the settlement and look back. The shelters form a loose but intentional pattern. The central fire glows softly. The windbreaks curve around the camp like protective arms. The lamps inside the tents shine faintly. You see early humans not just surviving but building comfort, predictability, and cooperation in the face of winter. You turn and begin walking away from the camp. The snow crunches beneath your boots. The world grows quiet again. But now you carry the image of a nomadic settlement in your mind, a place where warmth is not just created but shared through order and community. Ahead lies the next rise, where shelters slowly shift into something more permanent. You walk away from the memory of the nomad camp, following a long curve in the landscape where the snow thins and patches of dark soil peek through. The air feels heavier here, more still, as if the wind itself pauses to listen. You take careful steps, sensing that you are arriving at a turning point in the long story of warmth. For countless seasons, people moved from place to place, chasing herds, following the thaw, retreating when winter grew fierce. But eventually a new idea began to settle in human minds. What if shelter could stay where it was? What if warmth did not have to be rebuilt every time the world shifted? As you walk into a quiet hollow between two hills, you begin imagining the first permanent winter villages. You kneel and press your hand to the ground. The soil here is firm, protected from the worst winds. It feels stable, as if inviting someone to stay. Archaeological findings from different regions show that some prehistoric groups eventually built durable structures meant to last through many winters, not just one. These early villages were small at first, but they represented something profound, a choice to stop wandering for a while, to build deeper, stronger, warmer homes. You stand and look around the hollow as if it were a blueprint waiting to be filled. In your mind, you see the first structure rising. Not a tent, not a temporary pit, something sturdier. Walls built from thick layers of wood, stone, or packed earth. A roof made from branches, mud, and hides, designed to shed snow and retain heat. You picture yourself lifting a piece of timber with a group of others, setting it upright, and watching the frame of the home take shape. You walk toward where an entrance might be. You imagine a doorway framed with large stones, blocking the wind. Inside, the floor dips slightly, carved into the earth for insulation. The walls rise around you, covered with a mixture of clay and fibers that dries into a warm, solid surface. You run your fingers along the imagined wall and feel how it would hold heat through long nights. You take a step back and picture more homes appearing in the hollow, each built close to the next, smoke rising from several small vents, snow piled along the outer walls for extra insulation, people moving between the structures with calm familiarity. A shared rhythm forms, one that does not drift with the seasons. You sense the beginnings of winter neighborhoods, their layouts shaping early community life. You walk between these imagined houses, feeling the air growing warmer as the village forms around you. A thought drifts through your mind, something noted by researchers who study ancient settlements. When people began to stay in one place during winter, they often created designated spaces for different tasks. Storage pits for food, sheltered areas for tool-making, and communal hearths for evening gatherings. The organization of these spaces suggests deliberate planning, hints of early architecture taking its first steps. You step inside one of the larger structures. The air feels thick and warm. A fire burns in a stone-lined pit at the center. The walls are reinforced with wooden stakes and covered with layers of clay. On one side, food hangs from wooden pegs. On the other, furs cover a sleeping platform raised slightly off the cold ground. You imagine sitting on that platform, leaning back against a wall that holds the heat from the fire. The warmth surrounds you like an embrace. You picture families inside these homes on long winter nights, a parent teaching a child how to tie a knot in sinew, an elder telling a story that echoes softly off the walls. Someone stirs a pot hanging over the fire, filling the air with the scent of roots and herbs. A dog curled up near the entrance lifts its head lazily, warm from the glowing embers. You leave the structure and walk toward the center of the village. You picture a large communal shelter built from thicker timbers and broader stones. A gathering place. People sit in a circle around a wide hearth. They speak in low voices about hunting routes, weather, and stories passed through generations. You imagine the glow of the fire reflecting in their eyes, as they share warmth not only through flames, but through the bond of living closely together. As you walk through the imaginary settlement, another detail rises gently into your thoughts. Some excavations reveal clusters of homes built partly underground, connected by passageways that shielded residents from the harshest cold. These passageways functioned like insulated corridors, allowing people to move between spaces without stepping into the icy air. You picture ducking into one such tunnel, feeling warm air brushing your face as you move through it. You pause and consider the shift in lifestyle that permanent winter homes represent. People no longer relied on scattered shelters or makeshift camps. They planned their winters in advance. They stored food. They repaired roofs. They prepared for snow long before it arrived. This stability changed how communities formed, how knowledge was passed, and how warmth was created and shared. You walk to the edge of the imagined village and glance back. Smoke rises steadily from the vents. Snow rests peacefully on the rooftops. The homes feel rooted in the land, anchored by effort and cooperation. Children play near one of the entrances, bundled in furs. Adults carry bundles of reeds or wood, returning from gathering trips. The village breathes with quiet strength. You take a slow breath, letting the image settle in your mind. Permanent homes reshaped the human relationship with winter. They made warmth something that could be prepared, planned, and built to last. Inside these walls, people learned the comfort of staying still, of returning each night to the same bed, the same fire, the same community. You turn away from the village and begin walking again, snow crunching beneath your boots. The land stretches forward, ready to teach you how warmth was shared even beyond the borders of a single settlement. But for now, you carry the stillness and strength of those early winter homes with you, glowing like a fire inside your thoughts. You leave the quiet safety of the imagined winter village and continue walking across a landscape that feels wider now, as if the world itself is opening to a new chapter. The air carries a soft chill, but it no longer feels forbidding. Instead, it feels like an invitation to explore the connections that stretched between distant communities. As snow crunches softly beneath your boots, you begin to sense something important. Warmth was not only built, it was shared. Knowledge traveled from group to group, carried by footsteps, stories, and long memories. Techniques for staying alive in brutal winters did not remain secrets. They moved across the land just as surely as the people who needed them. You walk toward a gentle ridge where the snow is thin, revealing patches of dark soil and trampled grass. You kneel and press your hand against the ground, imagining that others once stood here long ago. Perhaps they looked toward a distant horizon, knowing that somewhere beyond the hills lived another group facing the same cold. Archaeologists studying ancient movement patterns see evidence of contact between far-living communities, tools shared, materials traded, and ideas passed quietly from one camp to another. You stand again and walk along the ridge, imagining a line of travelers carrying bundles of hides, bone tools, and precious bits of flint. Their clothing is thick with fur, their boots lined with grass. You picture someone carrying a small ember bundle inside a pouch, ready to spark warmth for strangers met on the trail. That simple act of sharing a flame might have been the earliest form of hospitality. You pause near a cluster of old stumps half buried in snow. You sit on one and picture a meeting between two groups. They approach with caution at first, watching one another closely. Then someone gestures toward their shelter in the distance, inviting the visitors to rest. As they gather near a fire, conversations begin. Perhaps not with words, but with gestures that show how to place stones to block wind, how to pack snow against the bottom of a tent, how to adjust a hide flap to let smoke escape gently without losing precious heat. You close your eyes and imagine the subtle exchange. One person demonstrates how to tie a bundle of reeds more tightly for insulation. Another shows how to weave grasses into mats that keep cold earth from stealing body warmth. You sense how necessary these quiet teachings must have been. A winter technique shared at the right moment could save lives many miles away. You rise and walk farther down the slope. You picture another kind of exchange now. Materials traveling between communities. Researchers studying ancient trade routes note that certain types of stone used for toolmaking appear far from their original sources. This suggests that people traded not only objects but also the knowledge of where to find them. You imagine someone offering a handful of river stones that hold heat well, showing how they can be used in fire pits or carried inside shelters at night. In return, they might receive a finely crafted bone needle, perfect for sewing thick winter clothing. You continue your walk, following a trail where the ground is packed firm, as if many feet once passed through. You imagine words spreading among groups about clever ways to survive brutal cold. One family might have mastered the technique of building strong snow walls. Another might have perfected hide layering for winter clothing. Another might have discovered how to dig angled vents in pit homes. These ideas traveled quietly but steadily, weaving early communities together in invisible threads. You pause beside a fallen tree trunk, and run your fingers along its surface. The bark is frozen and rough. You imagine yourself sitting here with someone from another camp, the two of you warming your hands near a shared fire. They might describe how their people build winter roofs with double layers of branches. You, in return, might show how to heat stones safely without cracking them. These simple conversations form the first bridges between worlds. A whisper of wind moves past you, carrying a faint suggestion of movement across the land. You imagine people walking from one winter village to another, to exchange goods or form alliances. When they arrived, they brought news: where herds had moved, which rivers had frozen early, how storms had shifted. Among these shared observations came something much quieter, but just as valuable: tips for warmth. How to reuse ashes to start fires more quickly. How to dry reeds inside a shelter so they weave better. How to carve a lamp bowl from soft stone so it holds melted fat without wasting any. You walk toward a wide clearing and picture a seasonal gathering. Several groups meet during a brief stretch of milder weather. They set up camps in a loose circle. Fires glow across the clearing. Children run between shelters. Adults trade tools, hides, and dried meat. In the midst of it all, people share winter knowledge. Someone shows a new method for stitching two hides together to trap even more heat. Someone else demonstrates a better way to construct a windbreak using alternating layers of stone and snow. These gatherings become quiet classrooms of survival. You kneel and scoop up a handful of snow, letting it sift through your fingers. You imagine explaining to someone from another group how snow can act as insulation when packed carefully along the base of a shelter. They listen, nod, and later teach the same trick to their own families. In this way, warmth spreads almost like a current, flowing from camp to camp, shaping countless winters. You stand again and begin walking slowly. Another thought drifts into your mind, one that researchers still reflect on. How much of this winter knowledge spread intentionally, and how much emerged naturally as groups observed one another? Did communities gather specifically to share survival tips, or did these lessons pass casually through everyday interactions? The answer is not certain, but you sense that both possibilities feel true. You step onto higher ground and look out over a wide, snow-covered field. In your imagination, travelers cross it with steady determination. They carry hides, baskets, and bundles of reeds. They pause at a frozen stream to rest, then continue onward toward another camp where warmth, conversation, and knowledge wait. The trail they leave behind becomes an invisible map of shared understanding. You take a slow breath and feel the weight of these connections. Winter might isolate communities physically, but knowledge flowed beyond those barriers. People learned from neighbors, from visitors, and from those who traveled long distances. Warmth became something communal, shaped by many hands across many winters. As you continue your walk, the land grows quieter again, but now you carry with you not only the memory of individual shelters, but the understanding that warmth expanded across the world through shared wisdom. Ahead lies the next part of the story, where shifting climates push humans to adapt once more, refining every method they have learned. You continue across the wide, snowy stretch, the air growing sharper with every step. The clouds hang low and heavy, drifting like slow-moving beasts across the sky. You feel the cold curl around your ankles and slip under your collar, not violently but with an eerie persistence that makes you pause. You inhale, and the breath seems to tighten in your chest. The world around you feels colder than before, as if the land itself is bracing for something larger. It is here that another truth settles quietly into your thoughts. The climate did not stay still. Temperatures shifted. Storms grew stronger. Ice pushed farther across continents. And early humans had to adapt once more. You walk toward a ridge, where the snow forms deeper drifts, their edges sharp as carved stone. You kneel and scoop a handful, noticing how fine and dry it feels, the kind of powdery snow that blows easily into storms. You stand slowly, imagining what it must have been like during periods when winters grew longer and harsher. People who had once relied on simple shelters had to rethink everything. Walls needed thickening, Roofs needed reinforcing. Clothing needed more layers. The world demanded more from them. You move up the ridge, your boots crunching through hardened crusts of ice. You picture a hunting group struggling against this same incline centuries ago. Their breath rose in frantic bursts. Their cloaks whipped in strong winds. Their steps were heavy, laden with the pressure of surviving a colder world. You imagine one of them stopping, turning to look back at their distant settlement, and knowing changes were needed or none of them would last through the next winter. At the top of the ridge, you look across a wide, frozen valley where frost stretches endlessly. You picture early humans studying the land with new caution. They pay attention to storm patterns, to wind direction, to the thickness of ice on lakes. They make choices based on the movements of animals, who sense environmental changes long before humans do. They adjust migration routes and shift seasonal campsites. You walk down the ridge and approach a hollow surrounded by frost-coated bushes. Here, you imagine a village preparing for a winter more severe than any before. Families gather materials early. Hides are thickened with additional fur. Reeds are doubled for insulation. Entrance tunnels are lengthened to trap cold air before it reaches the main living area. A commonly noted feature in colder-era sites is that doorways became lower and narrower, forcing people to crouch to enter. This design trapped warm air inside and blocked freezing gusts. You crouch as if stepping into such a doorway. The motion feels humble, almost like a small bow to the structure that keeps you alive. Inside the imagined dwelling, the air feels warmer but more crowded. You picture people adding new layers of mud and plant fibers to the walls. They press the mixture firmly, leaving handprints that tell silent stories of effort and resilience. You step farther into the shelter and imagine how the cold outside grows more aggressive each year. People respond by thickening roofs with snow and earth, creating heavy domes that hold heat tightly. You run your hand along the interior wall, imagining the rough but sturdy surface. The shelter feels heavier, denser, more committed to surviving the winter. You leave the dwelling and walk toward a ring of stones arranged around a large fire pit. The flames crackle brightly, illuminating determined faces. People sit close together, sharpening tools or stitching new layers of fur onto boots and cloaks. The work is intense, urgent. You picture someone wrapping a cloak around a child, checking each knot twice. The air carries the scent of burning wood and melting fat, mixing with the cold wind that slips between the shelters. You continue walking and imagine a group of hunters preparing for a journey. Winter prey becomes scarcer in colder periods. People must travel farther, sometimes across dangerous ice fields, to find food. You picture them tightening cords around their clothing, securing small ember bundles, and checking their spears. Their footsteps echo the fear and determination of facing an unforgiving world. You walk into a narrow ravine and notice how the wind funnels through with sharp intensity. You imagine ancient people learning how to use the land more intelligently during harsher winters. They build shelters in lower hollows, protected by natural slopes. They pile snow strategically along walls. They choose locations near water sources that stay partially unfrozen even in the coldest months. As you step through the ravine, another thought rises gently. Specialists studying shifts in prehistoric climate note that certain cultural changes seem to align with colder periods. People developed more specialized tools, improved clothing, and refined their shelters. Whether these changes happen directly because of climate shifts is a subject that researchers continue to explore with curiosity. You let that question drift quietly through your mind. You step into an open clearing where the snow almost glows in the pale light. You imagine people here building deeper pit homes, reinforced with more stones. They design angled vents so smoke escapes without letting cold air rush in. They create storage pits lined with grass and bark to protect food from freezing. Every decision carries the weight of survival. You kneel beside an imagined food pit and lift its hide covering. Inside are dried berries, strips of meat, roots wrapped in woven grass. The planning feels meticulous. You picture people checking these reserves every evening, making sure none has spoiled. Food stores become a lifeline when storms last for days. You walk deeper into the clearing and imagine new strategies emerging. People experiment with heated stones placed beneath sleeping areas or inside clay-lined pits to warm entire rooms. You picture a group building a small stone oven that keeps the shelter warm through long nights. The air inside becomes dense with heat, a protective layer against the cold that prowls outside. You pause and watch the imagined community from a distance. People adapt with calm determination. They cooperate more closely. Tasks become more specialized. Some fetch water, others mend clothing. Others watch the fire day and night, making sure warmth never dies. The cold forces unity, shaping early societies into tightly connected groups. You take a slow breath and feel the weight of their perseverance. Climate shifts did not break them. Instead, they transformed them. They learned to listen to the land, to observe the sky, to anticipate storms. They became architects of warmth in a world pushing them toward ice. As you continue walking, the horizon stretches forward, pale and quiet. You feel a new kind of respect for these ancient communities. Their shelters were not merely structures. They were evolving answers to a changing world. Ahead lies another mystery, one where warmth becomes something deeper, shaped not only by need but by meaning. You leave the clearing behind, walking slowly as the landscape begins to feel quieter, almost watchful. The cold presses in again, but this time there is something different in the air, something subtle that brushes the edge of your thoughts. You sense that warmth, in the ancient world, was not always a simple matter of physics or survival. Sometimes warmth gathered in places that felt heavier, stranger, and more meaningful. You take a few more steps, and the land shifts beneath your feet. You reach a shallow basin dotted with small depressions in the snow, each one arranged in a pattern too deliberate to be accidental. You walk among the shallow pits, crouching beside one. It is circular and lined with dark soil. In your mind you brush away snow, revealing stones arranged around the rim. You imagine kneeling at this very spot long ago, the ground glowing orange as a fire burns quietly inside the pit. But something about the placement feels off. It is too far from any dwelling, too exposed, too open to the sky. You tilt your head, sensing the same confusion scholars feel when they discover heated pits far from living areas. These features do not fit neatly into daily routines. You stand and look around the basin. The pits form a loose curve, almost like a crescent. You picture early humans gathering here at dusk. Their bodies lean toward the glowing pits, the warmth rising gently into the cold air. You imagine a low hum of voices, softer than in a shelter, their words drifting upward into the dark like breath. Perhaps they warmed stones, perhaps they cooked, but perhaps they came for reasons more complicated. You walk to another pit and kneel again. You imagine the fire inside burning low, the rocks glowing faintly red. You sense that such places could carry meaning beyond practical use. Some researchers studying ancient hearth sites have suggested that certain heated pits may have held symbolic or ceremonial purpose. Maybe they were places for storytelling. Maybe they marked seasonal events. Maybe they honored the spirits of ancestors. You let the thought rise gently without forcing an answer. You stand and close your eyes for a moment. The cold brushes your face, but your imagination fills the air with a soft warmth rising from the earth. You picture someone placing a carefully chosen stone into the pit, not for cooking, not for heating a home, but because the act meant something. The stone glows brighter as the fire touches it, and the person steps back, watching as warmth climbs into the night air. You walk farther into the basin, stopping at a larger depression bordered by small upright stones. You kneel and trace their shapes with your fingers. You imagine people gathering here in a circle on the coldest nights, lighting a fire as a signal, a ritual, a shared reminder that even in deep winter, the earth could still hold heat. You picture children sitting in their parents' laps, listening to stories whispered with reverence. stories about why fires were lit here and not elsewhere, stories about those who came before. You rise and imagine the soft glow of flames spreading across the circle. You imagine footsteps in the snow, people approaching from different shelters, bringing small offerings, perhaps a carved bone, perhaps a piece of dried grass, perhaps a smooth stone warmed by another fire. The items hold no power on their own, but the gathering itself creates warmth that is not just physical. It is communal, emotional, even spiritual. You sit on a low mound and gaze into the distance. You imagine a winter sky heavy with stars, each star reflecting faintly on the snow. Below them, these fires burn quietly, casting warm halos in the dark. People stand around the glowing pits, forming silhouettes against the light. They speak softly, their words blending with the crackling of flames. You think of another detail sometimes mentioned by researchers. In some regions, pits containing burnt bones or unusual arrangements of stones suggest that certain fires were used for specific purposes, perhaps for marking important moments in the seasonal cycle, perhaps for guiding travelers, or perhaps for honoring events that shaped the life of the group. These interpretations remain open, but the evidence hints at deeper layers of meaning behind the heat. You step forward and imagine scooping warm soil from the pit, letting it spill through your fingers. You feel how ancient people might have touched warm earth with gratitude. Warmth rising from the ground on a frozen night must have felt strangely sacred, a reminder that life persists even under layers of cold. You picture a young hunter approaching the pit at twilight, placing a small carved figure beside the fire. Maybe it represents a family member. Maybe it represents an animal spirit. Maybe it is simply a gesture of hope for the coming hunt. You picture the glow illuminating the figure, making it appear alive for a moment before the shadows reclaim it. You walk toward the far edge of the basin, stepping through imaginary footprints left by countless gatherings. You sense how these pits, these quiet circles of warmth, might have shaped early belief. Fire was not just a tool, it was a mystery, a force that transformed cold stone into glowing light, raw meat into nourishment, fear into comfort. It made sense that fire would find its place in ritual as well as survival. You stand and look back across the basin one more time. The pits glow softly in your imagination, arranged like small stars fallen upon the snow. The air carries a quiet reverence, as though the land remembers every fire kindled here. You begin walking again, feeling the cold return gently around you, but now you carry something new with you. The understanding that warmth could be practical, shared, and spiritual all at once. Ahead lies another part of your long journey, one shaped not only by fire or earth, but by the people who work together to create shelter and comfort in the cold. You leave the basin of quiet fire circles behind, stepping onto a stretch of land where the wind moves in long, steady breaths. The cold brushes your cheeks, but you barely notice. Your thoughts are drifting toward the people who tended those fires, who stitched hides, dug shelters, carried embers, and shaped entire winters with their hands. As you walk, you begin to sense another truth rising gently within the story. Warmth did not come from materials alone. It came from cooperation, from shared labor, from the ways people divided tasks and responsibilities. Every shelter you have imagined so far exists because someone built it, someone repaired it, someone taught others how to maintain it. Early humans survived the cold by working together, and the roles they adopted shaped their societies in subtle but powerful ways. You walk toward a small rise in the landscape where the snow is packed flat, almost polished by wind. You kneel and run your hand over the surface, imagining this as the busy center of an ancient camp. People gather here at dawn, preparing for a day of work. Some sharpen stone tools. Some stretch hides over wooden frames. Some check the fire pits, clearing old ash and arranging fresh tinder. You picture adults dividing tasks naturally, based on skill, strength, age, and experience. You stand again and walk a few steps toward where you imagine a set of winter shelters. From one structure, the muffled sound of scraping hides fills the air. From another, a rhythmic tapping echoing off bone or wood suggests a toolmaker shaping a new spear point. You picture a woman sitting near the entrance of a shelter, pulling sinew through a large hide, stitching it into a thick cloak. Nearby, someone else trims strips of fur to line a child's boots. Their hands move quickly, practiced from years of winter preparation. You pass a fire pit and imagine a group of men and women planning the next hunt. The cold season demands precision. Some people map the direction of migrating herds, others repair spear shafts, others discuss where snowdrifts are shallow enough to cross safely. You sense that these conversations shaped not only survival but the connections between people. Responsibilities overlapped, but patterns formed naturally. One person became known for sensing storms early, another for choosing the best shelter sites, another for perfecting the layering of hides. You pause near an imagined wooden frame where a young teenager stretches a fresh hide, pulling it tight while an elder watches closely. The elder offers quiet guidance, gesturing with firm, patient hands. This scene appears in many interpretations of ancient winter life. Knowledge passed through demonstration rather than instruction. You imagine the elder showing how to angle the scraper so the hide becomes soft enough to use as insulation. The teenager nods, tries again, improves with each stroke. Generational knowledge flows silently from one person to another. You walk farther into the imagined settlement and picture different groups working together. Some gather reeds near a frozen river. Their fingers tremble slightly from cold, but their movements are confident. Others carry stones to build new windbreaks or reinforce the walls of a shelter. The division of labor is not rigid like modern job titles. Instead, tasks shift fluidly based on need. People help where they are strongest, where they are most skilled, or simply where the work is heaviest. You step toward a group sewing winter clothing. Children sit nearby, learning by watching. One little hand picks up a bone needle clumsily, trying to push it through a scrap of hide. Someone laughs gently, adjusts the child's grip, and encourages them to try again. Even in the harshest climates, learning becomes a warm communal act. As you continue walking, another idea surfaces, one that specialists often consider when studying ancient societies. Roles within early communities were flexible. While there were tendencies based on age or physical ability, evidence suggests that many tasks overlapped. Both men and women could scrape hides, prepare firewood, build shelters, and make tools. The severe cold likely encouraged cooperation rather than strict separation. You imagine groups shifting responsibilities quickly when storms approached, each person doing whatever was necessary to keep the fire burning and the shelters standing. You move toward the edge of the settlement and find yourself imagining a hunting party returning with meat. You picture strong arms carrying heavy portions wrapped in hide. But behind them, others assist with tasks often overlooked, gathering snow for melting, warming stones, repairing damaged clothing. You sense how deeply intertwined these roles are, how the success of one group depends completely on the efforts of another. You kneel and press your palm against the snow, imagining the weight of those responsibilities. Every winter home you have envisioned exists because people worked as a coordinated whole. The builder relies on the hide tanner. The hide tanner relies on the hunter. The hunter relies on the toolmaker. The toolmaker relies on the fire tender. Every role supports the others like threads in a vast, intricate web. You stand once more and picture a group gathered near a fire at dusk. Adults sit together, repairing tools while talking quietly. Children drift sleepily beside them. Elders watch with wise eyes, offering occasional advice or stories about winters long past. You imagine an older woman explaining how her parents survived a terrible storm by building a snow-packed windbreak in minutes. You imagine a grandfather describing how he learned to carry embers across long migrations. These stories weave the past into the present, helping everyone learn the rhythms of survival. A delicate question drifts across your thoughts. How much did these roles shape the structure of early societies? Did communities become organized because the cold demanded it? Did cooperation strengthen bonds so tightly that entire cultures formed around shared responsibilities? It is a question still explored by researchers digging through old hearth sites and settlement remains. You take another slow step, feeling the land grow quiet around you. You imagine the day ending in that ancient winter village. The fire burns low. People retire to their shelters. Inside, families settle into warm clusters. Outside, a few remain awake, keeping watch. The responsibility rotates through the group, ensuring that the fire stays alive and no danger approaches unnoticed. This shared duty holds the entire settlement together. You begin walking again, the sound of your boots muffled by soft snow. You carry with you the sense that early human warmth depended as much on cooperation as on materials. People survived because they worked as one, each person contributing a piece of the puzzle. The cold world demanded unity, and unity became its own kind of shelter. Ahead lies the next chapter of your journey, where the youngest members of these communities begin to absorb the wisdom of staying warm in a world that never softened its winter bite. You continue walking across the snowy rise, feeling the cold nip at your cheeks again. But this time there is something softer in the air, something almost tender. You begin to sense the presence of little footsteps following behind the adults in all those ancient camps you imagined. Children, small hands touching hides, watching the fire with wide eyes, repeating the motions they saw without yet understanding their importance. As you step into a shallow valley where the wind quiets to a soft whisper, you see it clearly. Knowledge did not spread only through adults teaching adults. It flowed most naturally into the youngest members of the group, shaping them long before they realized they were learning. You walk farther into the valley, and the snow crunches beneath your boots in a gentle rhythm. You imagine a group of children moving across this same ground thousands of years ago, bundled in thick furs stitched with care. Their cheeks are flushed from cold, but their movements are confident, lively. They run between shelters, slipping past adults who smile with tired affection. Even the harshest winter cannot erase childhood curiosity. You kneel beside a smooth patch of snow and picture a child crouching there long ago, tracing shapes in the ice with a small stick. Maybe they draw the curve of a mammoth's tusk or the outline of a shelter. They repeat what they have seen with their own eyes. You imagine an adult approaching, kneeling beside them, gently correcting the shape or praising their observation. Learning begins in these small gestures, carried quietly from one generation to the next. You stand and walk toward the base of a shelter in your mind. Inside, the fire glows softly, and you imagine a child sitting near the entrance, watching an elder adjust a vent flap to guide smoke upward. The child tilts their head, absorbing every detail. Later, when playing with scraps of hide and twigs, they mimic the motion. They lift a piece of hide and pretend to tie it to a branch. No formal lesson is needed. The cold world teaches through repetition and example. You step into the imagined shelter and sit beside the fire. The warmth touches your face, and in the dim glow you picture a small figure holding a stone scraper, attempting to soften a bit of hide. Their hands struggle at first. The hide slips. The scraper wobbles. You hear a soft laugh from an adult, not mocking but encouraging. The elder takes the tool, demonstrates the motion once more, then hands it back. The child tries again. This time the motion is steadier. You look toward the sleeping area of the shelter. A child curls beneath a fur blanket, listening to the sounds of adults preparing for night. They hear the crackle of the fire, the soft brushing of hides, the quiet conversations that float through the air. Even when resting, they are learning. They absorb the rhythm of camp life, the calm way adults work through cold and hunger, the quiet authority of elders guiding the group. You step outside and walk toward a frozen riverbank. You picture children accompanying adults to gather reeds. The adults choose the tall, sturdy stalks. The children gather the smaller ones, their hands numb but determined. They laugh when snow falls into their sleeves. They watch carefully as their parents strip leaves and bundle the reeds. Later, the children repeat the motions with their own handfuls, clumsy but earnest. In these moments, learning becomes play, and play becomes the foundation of survival. You continue walking and imagine a group of children following a hunting party at a safe distance. They step where adults step, learning how to move silently across snow. They crouch behind fallen logs, mimicking the stance of hunters. One child lifts an imaginary spear, practicing how to hold it steady. An adult watches and smiles gently, offering a few quiet tips. You pause near a cluster of stones and imagine children building small pretend shelters with them. They lift pebbles, stacking them in tiny rings that mimic adult fire circles. They drape hide scraps over twigs to copy the shape of real tents. Their creations fall apart easily, but the joy in mimicking adult tasks never fades. These games plant the roots of skills they will rely on when they grow older. As you walk farther, another detail rises softly in your mind. Experts studying ancient settlements often note miniature tools among excavation finds. Small scrapers, small blades, tiny pieces of bone shaped like sewing needles. These miniature versions suggest that children were not only watching adults, they were given tools of their own, scaled to their size, allowing them to learn safely and gradually. You imagine a child holding one of these tiny tools, beaming with pride at being trusted with real responsibility. You step onto a slight rise where the snow is thinner. From here you picture a winter village spread below. Children dart between shelters, carrying bits of wood or reeds. Some help brush snow from the roofs. Others fetch snow for melting. Each task is small but meaningful. These small acts give them practice, confidence, and a sense of belonging. You kneel and imagine an evening inside a shelter. Children gather close as an elder tells a winter story. The firelight dances on everyone's faces. The children absorb not only the tale, but the tone, the importance, the warnings hidden within. Stories become lessons disguised as entertainment. Lessons about where to build shelters, how to spot safe ice on rivers, how to read the wind before a storm. You rise again, feeling how these quiet teachings formed the backbone of ancient winter life. Children learned without being told they were learning. They imitated, experimented, failed, tried again, and absorbed wisdom simply by being close to those who survived before them. A question drifts softly across your thoughts. How much did these early childhood lessons shape the evolution of shelter building? How many innovative ideas came from young hands experimenting with materials in playful curiosity? Researchers sometimes wonder if creativity flourished through the freedom children had to mimic, adapt, and invent their own techniques while playing. You walk slowly toward the next slope. The sky above you feels wider now, as if each step draws you deeper into the memories of the past. You carry with you the image of small hands shaping winter wisdom, weaving soft lessons into the hard fabric of survival. Ahead, the land begins to tilt downward, and you sense another truth waiting for you. Warmth depends not only on work or learning, but on listening to the land itself. You walk down the gentle slope with slow, steady steps, letting the cold gather lightly around your legs while your thoughts begin to shift again. After watching how children absorb the ways of winter, you now feel the land pulling your attention back to itself. Every shelter you have imagined so far relied not only on tools or teamwork, but on a quiet awareness of the landscape. The earth, the wind, the slope of a hill, the shape of a riverbank, all these subtle things whispered lessons that early humans learned to hear. You reach a stretch of open ground where the wind changes direction, brushing your cheek in a way that feels almost intentional. You pause. This is where the next truth lives. Warmth begins long before a shelter is built. It begins with choosing the right place. You take a few steps into a shallow dip in the snow. The air instantly feels different, softer, less aggressive. You crouch down and rest a hand on the cold surface. Even in this imagined winter world, you can feel that this hollow is naturally protected. Early humans would have noticed this too. They observed how snow drifted in certain places but not in others, how wind curled around a boulder instead of through it, how the sun warmed one side of a hill while the other remained frozen. A widely recognized observation from ancient dwellings is that many were placed with remarkable sensitivity to local microclimates. You rise and walk toward a line of low bushes half buried in snow. Their branches tremble gently, and you watch how the wind flows around them. You imagine someone long ago crouching just like you, watching the same pattern. They would have known immediately which side of the bushes offered protection. You step behind them, and the cold softens noticeably. This small detail, the way wind behaves around plants, became a quiet survival guide. You continue walking and approach a rocky outcrop. The stone rises from the earth like a frozen wave. You touch its surface, feeling the rough texture beneath your palm. The rock blocks the wind, but it also reflects heat. You imagine building a shelter on its leeward side, letting the stone act as a natural wall. People living in colder times likely learned very early that rocks stored warmth from the sun during daylight hours and released it slowly at night. Even a few degrees made a difference. You step around the rock and stand where sunlight touches the slope. You feel nothing but cold on your skin, yet your imagination fills the space with that ancient warmth. You picture someone testing the direction of sun and wind the way you do now. They turn their face toward the light. They feel which side of the ridge catches the wind. They choose a place where snow piles up as insulation instead of blowing into their living area. You walk down toward a frozen stream. The ice glints faintly under the pale sky. You kneel near the bank and imagine how water shaped winter decisions. A shelter built too close might flood when snow melts. A shelter built too far might make gathering water difficult. Early humans navigated this balance instinctively. They placed homes where water was accessible but safe. You imagine a group gathering ice blocks here, carrying them back to melt inside warm shelters, watching steam rise into the still air. You continue your walk along the river, watching how the bank curves into a sheltered bend. You picture early people settling here temporarily during winter hunts. The curve breaks the wind. The slope offers natural drainage. The nearby forest provides wood and hides animals from predators. You sense how these simple features created the blueprint for sustainable warmth. You walk farther and pause at a narrow stretch between two hills. The path funnels wind in a sharp stream, making the cold sting more fiercely. Instinctively, you step aside, seeking the calmer air near the hill's edge. This instinct is older than you realize. People learn to read wind corridors like this, avoiding them when building shelters. They would place fire pits behind natural curves, letting the land cradle the flames. You climb the smaller hill and turn to look back at the valley spreading below. In your mind, you see dots of ancient shelters placed in the warmest, calmest spots, some near trees that block storms, some against ridges that offer protection, some facing the direction that receives morning sunlight first, because warmth at dawn mattered deeply after long nights. You sit on the hill for a moment, resting your hands on your knees. The landscape feels vast and quiet. You listen to the wind, imagining how ancient hunters listened for clues. The rustle of grasses told them how strong the wind was. The pattern of drifting snow revealed where storms passed through. The firmness of the ground beneath their feet indicated whether a spot would stay dry. These small details allowed them to shape warmth long before the first stone or hide was lifted. You walk again and imagine stepping into a thick forest. The trees stand tall and close, their branches heavy with snow. The air here is still strangely warmer. You imagine a group choosing this place for building winter shelters because the trees reduce wind speed and trap heat near the ground. You picture children gathering sticks, adults building low shelters between tree trunks. Even at night, the forest muffles the cold and dampens the roar of winter storms. You feel comfort settle quietly in your chest. You step out of the forest and onto a flat open plain. Here, the wind feels stronger immediately, driving frost toward your skin. You feel exposed, vulnerable, and in that moment you understand why early humans avoided building in open spaces unless absolutely necessary. You turn your back to the wind, imagining yourself searching for the nearest ridge or dip in the land for shelter. You walk toward a large boulder half buried in snow. You press your hand to its cold surface and imagine using this natural feature as part of your shelter. People likely built partial walls around such rocks, saving energy and using the land itself as a foundation. The idea feels simple and brilliant at once. You continue walking, listening to the faint hush of wind behind you. A quiet thought rises. Some specialists studying ancient camps suggest that communities return to the same winter sites year after year because the land taught them where warmth lived. These locations became part of their memory, their culture, their story. Children learned the safest spots. Adults passed down warnings about dangerous slopes or unpredictable riverbanks. Over generations, the land and the people formed a silent partnership. You pause on a ridge and look out over the imagined winter world. You see shelters nestled in sheltered hollows, fires burning in wind-protected corners, and people moving with deep awareness of the ground beneath them. They listened to the world, and the world guided them. The snow whispers beneath your boots as you move forward again. You carry the wisdom of the landscape with you, ready to see how all these lessons weave together through the passing of seasons. Ahead, the world begins to shift once more, guiding you toward a full year in the frozen cycle. You continue walking along the ridge, feeling the cold press gently against your face. The wind has softened, and the sky above looks pale, almost translucent, as if winter itself is pausing to let you listen. Ahead of you, the land widens into a long valley, its curves gentle and familiar. Something in the air feels cyclical, rhythmic, like the quiet turning of a wheel. You take a slow breath and realize you have reached the point in your journey where the story stretches beyond a single night or storm. It stretches across the entire year. To understand how ancient people built warmth, you must feel how their world changed from one season to the next, and how each adjustment shaped the shelters they called home. You descend into the valley, your footsteps sinking lightly into the snow. You imagine this same place many thousands of years ago, not in the deep freeze of winter, but in early spring. The snow begins to thaw in patches. Thin rivulets of water carve narrow paths through the ground. The air still bites at the skin, but the sun lingers a little longer at dusk. You picture a small group emerging from their winter shelters, lifting hide flaps and stepping cautiously outside. Their breath still rises in white clouds, yet the cold is no longer absolute. They examine their homes, checking for cracks in the walls, repairing areas where winds were harshest. Spring becomes the season of rebuilding, strengthening, and preparing for the warmth to return. You walk through a cluster of imagined springtime shelters. Some walls are reinforced with fresh clay. New branches are cut to replace weakened frames. Children gather dry grasses to stuff into insulation gaps. Adults patch tears in hide coverings, pulling sinew tight with skilled hands. The ground beneath you feels softer than before. You picture people taking advantage of this softness, digging shallow drainage channels around shelters to prevent flooding as the snow melts. You continue walking as spring slowly shifts into early summer. In your mind, the valley transforms. Snow retreats into the highest peaks. The river, once a frozen ribbon, flows freely. Grasses ripple in the breeze. The air warms until the cold becomes something distant, a memory stored inside bones and tradition. You imagine shelters being aired out, hides lifted to let sunlight dry them, reeds replaced with fresh ones harvested from the river banks. With summer comes mobility, and many groups move freely across the land, leaving winter villages behind. Their lighter shelters accompany them, built for speed, ease, and temporary comfort. You picture portable hide tents rising in open meadows, fire pits used only for cooking, not warmth. People relax beside the river, sharpening tools with unhurried motions. Children splash in the shallows. Summer becomes the season when warmth comes from the sun rather than fire. But even now, the lessons of winter linger. People observe where the breezes are greatest. They check where water collects after rain. These observations prepare them for the cold that will return. As you walk through the valley, the light in your mind shifts again, sliding into early autumn. The days shorten, The nights grow sharper. The first thin frost appears on the grass. You picture hunters returning with heavy loads, knowing the time for preparation is short. People gather reeds and grasses in great bundles, drying them in the last warm sunlight. Trees begin to change color, and their branches are cut for new shelter frames. You imagine a flurry of activity in these months. Wood is carved, stones are gathered, hides are cleaned and stretched. Autumn is the great turning point, the moment when every detail of shelter building becomes urgent. You pass an imagined working area where adults tan hides using a mixture of oils, smoke, and patient scraping. Children help sort reeds by thickness. Elders sit near fires, shaping bone needles and giving advice. Everyone works with calm focus, knowing winter demands preparation, not panic. Storage pits are checked. Food is dried, smoked, or sealed in containers lined with grass. Lamps are tested, ember bundles updated. The year pivots toward cold. As you continue walking, the world around you shifts back into early winter. Snow returns in soft layers, rivers grow still, the air sharpens, and you feel the cold wrap around you with familiar intensity. In your mind, winter shelters stand strong in the valley once more, some partially underground, some built with heavy roofs and thick walls, some lined with hides and mats woven tightly. Fires burn inside them, casting warm light onto walls decorated with soot and handprints. Winter is not only a season, it is a state of mind, a long lesson repeated year after year. You walk through the winter settlement and feel the rhythm of the cold months. People stay close inside their homes. They share warmth, stories, and food. Tools are repaired. Clothing is strengthened. Children practice scraping hides. Adults tend the fires carefully, checking vents, adjusting stones, ensuring the flames burn cleanly. The shelters glow softly in the long nights, their walls holding heat like the memory of summer sunlight. You pause near one home and watch an imagined family go through their evening routine. Someone adds dry wood to the fire. Someone else adjusts a hide curtain over the doorway. A child tucks warm stones into a sleeping area. Outside, the world is silent, but inside the shelter, warmth pulses like a living heartbeat. You step away from the home and rise to the top of a small hill. From there, you see the entire year cycle in your mind. Spring repairs, summer travel, autumn preparation, winter endurance, all of it weaving through the same people, shaping their shelters, their habits, their instincts. Every choice is guided by the season ahead or the season remembered. Warmth is not one moment. It is a moving knowledge carried across months, years, and generations. You let the wind brush your face again. The cold feels steady but not overwhelming. You understand now that warmth in the ancient world was not simply built. It was timed, planned, practiced through a full turning of the seasons. Early humans learned that survival was not a single act, but a yearly cycle repeated with patience and care. With slow steps, you begin walking toward the far end of the valley. Beyond it lies the final part of your journey, where techniques become tradition and warmth becomes legacy. You step out of the Valley of Seasons and walk toward a stretch of land where the snow lies smooth and untouched, glowing faintly beneath the pale sky. The wind is softer here, almost hesitant, as if the world knows you are nearing the end of a very long memory. You take one slow breath and feel something subtle rise inside you. Every shelter, every fire, every hide, every stone you have imagined so far did not simply disappear with the passing of generations. They left traces. Techniques turned into habits. Habits turned into teachings. Teachings turned into traditions. And traditions became the long memory of warm places carried forward through time. You walk across the snow, your steps sinking lightly. With each quiet crunch, you imagine footsteps from thousands of years ago layered beneath your own. Footsteps of those who learned how the land shaped warmth, how bodies shared heat, how stones held fire, and how shelters grew from simple hides into sturdy winter homes. These footsteps overlap, drift, and merge, forming a trail as old as human endurance itself. You reach a small rise in the landscape and kneel, placing your palm on the cold ground. You imagine someone kneeling here long before you, teaching a child where the wind comes from during winter storms. Their voice is soft, their gestures patient. They trace lines in the snow to show where drifting happens, where the land curves enough to offer protection, where the cold sinks at night. The child listens, absorbing knowledge carried through countless winters. You feel the echo of that lesson beneath your hand. You stand again and picture stories told beside ancient fires, stories about the first shelters built from mammoth bones, standing strong against the wind, stories about ancestors who carried glowing embers across frozen plains, stories about whole families digging into the earth to create warm havens beneath snow and soil. These stories become more than tales. They become explanations for why things are done a certain way, reasons that outlive the builders themselves. You walk through the imagined remains of a winter settlement. Most of the structures have collapsed or sunk into the ground, but the patterns remain faintly visible. A ring of stones marks the old fire pit. A shallow depression suggests where a pit home once sat. A scattering of bones hints at meals shared long ago. You pause and imagine a group returning to this same site year after year. Each time they rebuild the shelters in the same places because the land proved itself trustworthy. Over generations, this location becomes part of their identity. Stories say, this is where storms are gentler, where the river never freezes completely, where the sun touches the ridge earliest in winter. You continue walking and picture how early humans shared these memories not only in stories, but in rituals. Perhaps families touched the first hearthstone of the season before lighting the fire. Perhaps they thanked the earth for holding their warmth. Perhaps they marked the entrance of their shelter with carved patterns passed down through generations, each pattern representing a lesson from winters survived. You step near a large boulder at the edge of the clearing and imagine children learning from elders here. The elders show how to test snow for building blocks, how to choose the right wood for frames, how to weave reeds tightly, how to position a vent so smoke escapes without stealing heat. The children repeat the motions slowly, sometimes awkwardly, but always with respect. You can almost hear the whisper of their voices, filled with reverence for the knowledge that keeps their families alive. You walk around the boulder and see the memory of a communal shelter in your mind. People gather inside, repairing tools while telling stories that explain the origins of their homes. Maybe they believe the first winter shelter was inspired by watching animals burrow underground. Maybe they say their ancestors received wisdom from a spirit that lived within the ice. Maybe they believe the land itself teaches those who listen. These explanations, though shaped by imagination, preserve the truth of survival embedded within them. As you move forward, the wind lifts slightly, brushing snow across your boots. You picture nomadic groups returning from long migrations and sharing new techniques with others. A traveler brings a better stitching method. Another shows how to line a shelter with double layers of reeds. These small innovations ripple outward for generations, shaping the future long after individual lives fade. You reach a point where the land feels ancient, as if countless winters have passed through it. You close your eyes and imagine all the people who learned to survive here. Their hands building, their breath freezing in the air, their hearts steady as they face storms that would paralyze the unprepared. Each generation added another piece to the silent library of human endurance. You picture tools buried beneath centuries of soil stone scrapers, worn smooth, broken bone needles, pieces of hide hardened by time. Each one, a fragment of a lesson passed from one generation to another. You imagine someone finding these items long after their creators are gone, holding them with quiet wonder, sensing the warmth they once helped preserve. You inhale deeply and feel the cold settle on your tongue, crisp and sharp. Then you exhale slowly and feel something warmer move through you. A recognition, a connection to all those who came before. They taught one another how to stay alive, how to build warmth, how to read the land, how to trust the world enough to build homes within it. Those teachings shape you even now, hidden within instincts you rarely question. You take your final steps through this ancient winter landscape and picture the long memory of warm places carried through time. Adults guiding children, children growing into builders, builders shaping shelters, shelters protecting families, families telling stories, stories becoming tradition, tradition becoming legacy. You pause at the edge of a gentle rise, the horizon stretching wide and peaceful ahead of you. The cold waits, but you no longer fear it. You carry the warmth of thousands of hands and thousands of winters. You carry the memory of how humans turned a frozen world into a home, one flame, one hide, one wall, one shared moment at a time. And with that final understanding, your long journey through the world of ancient warmth settles softly into stillness. The world around you begins to fade into softer shapes, as if the snow is settling over everything in slow, quiet layers. The cold no longer feels sharp against your skin. It feels muted now, like a memory drifting into the background. Your breath comes gently, rising as faint clouds that melt into the quiet air. You let your shoulders loosen a little, then a little more. The long path behind you begins to dim, not with darkness, but with a calm glow, the echoes of firelight lingering in your mind. You picture the many shelters you visited along the way, each one softened now into warm blurs of orange, gold, and ember red. The caves, the hide tents, the pit houses, the snow domes, the bone-framed homes. They blur together like distant lanterns, each one flickering gently, guiding you toward rest. You feel the warmth of their fires drifting toward you, slow and steady, wrapping you like a blanket made of memory itself. The wind dwindles until it becomes only the faintest touch, almost a breath on your cheek. Even the snow beneath your feet feels quieter, as though the whole landscape has eased into a gentle hush. You notice your steps slowing, your thoughts drifting in smooth, wide circles. Every lesson you followed across the seasons settles low in your chest, warm and soft, like the glow of a sheltered hearth. You close your eyes for a moment and imagine a final fire waiting for you, steady and small, burning inside a quiet winter home. The warmth rises toward you in gentle waves. You step closer in your mind, letting the light brush your face, letting it ease the last sharp edges of the cold. Let that warmth linger with you now. Let it soften your breath, slow your thoughts, and guide you gently into rest.